long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host and honored representative of the Podcast Free Zone Ad Hoc Committee, and I'm joined as always by my friend and co-committee member...
President.
What?
I'm president of the committee.
You can't just...
Well, I did.
Okay, joined by the president of the committee, Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Mr. President?
It's going great, buddy.
Did we vote on this?
This is not a democracy, Scott.
This week on the show, The Stand continues with chapters 49 through 51. All of our heroes make their way to the Boulder Free Zone, where they begin to contemplate both what kind of society to build and what to do about this whole dark man problem. Matt, what did you think about this week's reading?
Well, this is going to be a lot to talk about.
Yeah, a little bit.
We're definitely moving into a part of the book that I don't know, mildly surprised. Like we saw the collapse of civilization, and King got to make a lot of interesting, nuanced, thematic points about the nature of society. And now we're seeing the reconstruction of civilization. And as we do that, he makes a whole different, equally interesting set of points about society. And that's really fun to see because it's this, I don't know, it's just a really interesting way of approaching the subject matter. Seems really fresh. I know that's a very meta comment, but that is kind of my takeaway from this whole week of reading is like how cool it is that, we've set up all these characters, we've set up this world, we've set up this situation. Now what we're doing with it is we were rebuilding society, reestablishing society, and there's all sorts of interesting things that King is saying about that.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if it would surprise you to learn that this section of the novel we've gotten into is a lot of people's least favorite portion of the book. All the kind of reconstruction going on in the Boulder Free Zone and the kind of endless meetings our characters are going through in order to try to figure stuff out. A lot of people just aren't big fans of this part of the book in particular. If there's a part of the book they don't like, not saying that people don't like the book, but if there's a part of the book the people like the least, this is usually that section. For me, I found it really, really fascinating this week, the ways in which King uses all this stuff to really dive into character. Like there's a lot of just fantastic character moments for every single one of our characters that we've really gotten to know over the course of this book. And, some new ones that we really haven't focused on very much until this chapter. I was kind of blown away by how much highlighting I was doing in my book as I was going, because I was like, oh, that's a great character moment. That's a great way of telling what this guy's about. That's a great way of complicating Larry. Like it's just beat after beat after beat of just kind of layering these great character moments on top of each other. And so, yes, I mean, I think the actual maneuverings of the plot are pretty much at a standstill in this. Like not plot wise, not a lot happens this week, right? I mean, there's not any movement forward on the actual solving of the problem. I think it's, you might make this comparison later in the episode, I'm just guessing, but I think it is very similar to the Council of Elrond chapter in Lord of the Rings, where, we've gotten everyone together. We know we've kind of maybe figured out what we have to do, but we're not exactly sure how we're going to do it and how we're going to proceed from here now.
Actually the comparison I was going to make and will make for different reasons later, but it was going to be when they arrive at Lothlorien, which is a different sort of hiatus in the action in that story, right?
Sure.
It's a pause. And I understand like we lose a lot of the propulsiveness and the tension that was caused by, okay, there's these people who are dealing with this, that, they're actively reeling from this disaster. They're all basically in a survival situation. There are, everybody's carrying guns around, and then suddenly the stakes drop way down. And it's still really interesting. It's just your level of like engagement and like the feeling of needing to turn the page to find out what happens next drops way off. And I can see why that, would be somebody's least favorite part.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly the difference between like turning a corner and coming across two men with guns telling you to get off your motorcycles, and a casual conversation over dinner in which you're slightly worried about what someone might be planning or thinking, but you don't really know. Like, those are very different kinds of tensions, and I think they're both good. I like them a lot, but yeah, they are very, very different.
It's just a problem with long form storytelling. I mean, we've seen this in other stories, in other very long form stories that we've covered, where the character's life goes from being extremely chaotic and fraught to sort of being relatively stable, and a lot of people perceive that as like, oh, the book became boring.
Yeah.
And I do get it. It's just like, well, you just have to retune and be like, okay, well, this is what we're doing now, and then it's fine.
Yeah, and my response to a lot of those people would also be, I don't think you'd like the book if it was that the entire time either. I think you would find that overwhelming. So this is another case of people not exactly sure of what they want. Not that there's anything wrong with not liking this part. I'm not saying that, but yeah. All right, so we've talked for 5 minutes about what we're going to talk about in classic Doof Media form. We just preambled our conversation for a whole 5 minutes. And
now we're talking about that fact. So,
I mean, that is us to a T. Before we get into the actual chapter discussion, though, we did have a couple of quick announcements. The first one is that we've recorded another episode of our Other Levels of the Tower Patreon series, where we kind of take a look at King adaptations. This month, we took a look at Stephen King's Silver Bullet. Matt and I recorded that last night. And if you are listening to this right now, it should already be out and available at our Patreon. That's patreon.com/doofmedia. So if you haven't checked it out yet, you should. I enjoyed that conversation a lot. We kind of went crazy with it, Matt. We went all over the place. We talked about werewolf movies in general. We talked about Underworld for 10 minutes somehow, but I thought it was a fun conversation.
Yeah, that's a fun movie to talk about too. It's got its pros, it's got its cons. It's not just a big pile of garbage like the previous movie we covered. So it was actually a fun conversation.
That is true. That one of Silver Bullet's biggest pro is that it does not sell.
Yep.
So yeah, check that out. Once again, it's patreon.com/doofmedia. I believe at the Doof Troop level or higher gets you access to that levels of the tower and all the levels of the tower we've done, which similar to Roland's is numerous and seemingly never ending.
Yep.
Another quick announcement, Matt. I think we started getting some emails, so we just wanted to reach out to people in the easiest way we can. We are still very much in the process of reading every single of the 50 plus stories we got for our short fiction contest. We need to read through them all before we do anything as far as voting goes. So we're doing that. It's basically a novel that y'all gave us. If you take 2,000 words times 51 stories, that's basically a book. So we're still working on it. We will have updates for y'all shortly, but just didn't want to leave all of our contest entrants and all our patrons who are wondering when they get to read these stories in the lurch. So that's what's going on there.
Yeah. We're getting through it. So,
yeah, we are.
We'll keep you updated.
Yeah. All right, Matt, let's do it. Let's begin with chapter 49. And I think, the thing I've been doing throughout the chapters is basically saying, this is chapter, 23, and it's a Larry chapter. We can't do that anymore, right? As of this week, we can no longer label the chapters after specific characters, because, very quickly in this week's reading, all of our major characters, all of the quote unquote good ones, have all congregated in one place. And so basically each chapter is jumping back and forth between point of view pretty regularly, to the point where there's not one individual character focused per chapter. But this chapter focuses a lot on Larry. I think we kind of catch up with Larry and his group after being away from him for, I looked this up, like 150 plus pages since we got to hang out with Larry Underwood. Which, I mean, I guess maybe if you're reading, regularly like a normal person, that's not too much. But for us, that's the equivalent of 3 weeks. So that's pretty long.
Yeah, it is interesting because obviously there's no true protagonist, but Larry's the kind of the closest thing to being a protagonist in my mind. And I guess I mainly say that because he is the one where we're not really sure what his path is going to be. Characters like Franny get as much, if not more, screen time, but I don't feel any doubt that Franny is going to come out on the the good side, right? So that's the only reason I say that that just makes it surprising that we spent so much time away from him. That's all I'm saying.
Sure, no, I get that. And I think King realizes that we spent a long time away from Larry, right? Because I think that this opening chapter for us kind of spends some time catching us up with Larry. And it does it in a really interesting way, too, because we don't start the chapter in Larry's point of view. We actually start the chapter in Lucy Swan's point of view as she is thinking about and discussing Larry. And it allows us to see him from someone else first. And that I think that helps us catch up on, who he is now, right?
Yeah, it's a cool trick because it allows us to process the passing of time and the changes in Larry more effectively, more efficiently. Also, when it comes to Larry, he has historically been full of shit regarding his own progress as a human being in particular.
Fair.
And so it's useful for us to see him from the outside and get some objective confirmation that these changes, these improvements in him are actually real. And they're not just overgenerous self-assessments that we're seeing from inside Larry's head.
That's so right. Yeah.
Gives us a lot of confidence.
It does. And I think that's really important because I think we need to understand who Larry is as he goes into the Boulder Free Zone and then almost immediately assumes another role of leadership, arguably a more important one this time.
Yeah. I really like this choice, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do too. So we learn that Larry's party has now swelled to 19 people. It's the number.
He did it. It's the Stephen King number. Do you think he changed it? Do you think it's a modification? Probably not.
I mean, it's even if he did change it, it's still considerably pre his decision to make it an important number. So
also, it's like who cares how many people are in the party?
I think he just really likes the number 19. I think that's it.
Yeah.
Or I mean, in the world of the Dark Tower, of course it was 19, right?
Yeah.
It's the turtle singing to Stephen. And that's why he picked 19 here.
True.
So our characters are a mere day away from the Boulder Free Zone, where the rest of our characters have congregated. I really love, as we're speaking here about the Boulder Free Zone, I love the little beat that's dropped here at the beginning of the chapter that Nadine is like super into that name. Like she takes to it immediately and is like, yes, this is a great name. I love it. That's what we're going to call it now. That's what everyone's calling it. And Nadine in particular really likes it. And the reason behind that becomes very clear very shortly in the chapter, but it's just this kind of thing thrown in here to kind of make you go, oh, I wonder why that is. And King doesn't hold that back from us for very long, but it's just kind of, I think, we talked about how the chapter kind of reestablishes and resets up Larry. It also has to like remind us that Nadine is this kind of mysterious woman that we don't quite know yet. And I think that's one of the ways in which King does it is reintroducing the mystery. Just go, I wonder why she liked that name so much.
Yeah, it's interesting because it shifts from her being mysterious to her being like extremely foreboding and dreadful.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting because I wasn't like worried about Nadine before. I was just like, that's interesting. Like that's, I'm curious about, where this character is going, but not
Sure.
in a way where I was like, uh-oh. And now it's definitely different. It's just an interesting shift.
Yeah. The second you get into her head, it certainly becomes like, oh no. We'll talk about that more in a bit, but we learned here that Lucy and Larry are an item now, but that something is troubling Larry, and that Lucy, after finding him missing from their sleeping bag, goes to look for him. Instead of finding Larry, she finds a new character named Judge Ferris sitting out late reading his Bible. We learn that Judge is one of the characters that they found along their way. He's an old man that used to be a judge, and he's sitting here reading from Job. That's not great. Not great.
I think we may be onto something with all this Bible stuff, Scott.
I agree with you.
I mean, not only is he reading from Job, but he's sort of actively thinking about how Larry is like Job, sort of, or maybe how they are all are like Job, I guess.
I think so, and I think in this world where God has spoken to this old woman and told them to gather these people for some reason. Just being reminded of the existence of Job is not, I'm not going to call it a good thing, right? Like that's, for those that don't know, the story of Job is, it's a rough one. It's God tries to prove that, the most faithful will still continue to worship and believe in him despite every possible bad thing happening to them. And Job is just the story of Job getting everything taken away from him and still being faithful. And the conclusion is, yay. And where I think modern person reads that section of the Bible and goes, oof.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's very much resonant with Mother Abigail's attitude toward all this, and it is one of those classic Old Testament stories where you're just like, this character of God is totally inconsistent with
any New Testament type guy, like modern. Yeah. You're totally right. It doesn't match at all. I actually, I wonder how people square this in a lot of ways. I guess the technical way a Christian would square it is just the Jesus came and the new covenant like redefines humans' relationship with God, right? So it's just different now.
Yeah, that's that is the technical way of squaring it. Yes.
But yeah, this God, the God of Job, is not a guy I want to hang out with, to be honest with you.
So this is a question for you or for anybody really. Like, is it supposed to be the case that like the reason why God changes into being the more forgiving God is because God has the experience of becoming incarnated as a man and comes to understand the suffering of mankind, or is that not? Because I don't remember ever hearing that at all, but that kind of makes sense to me as like a justification. You know what I mean?
And I'll give this with the massive caveat that I am not a religious scholar at all. I'm just a guy that reads Stephen King books and notices when he makes Bible references that I recognize. My understanding of it was always the idea that post Jesus, the original sin and all sin has kind of been taken from us in a lot of ways. And so that in and of itself redefines everything, right? Like that like we like post Garden of Eden, like we sucked because God, I don't want to say God was mad at us, because I don't want to prescribe that kind of emotion to what is supposed to be an all-powerful, all-knowing being. But like every cruel thing that happened to us throughout history was explained away by original sin. And then the coming of Jesus and the taking of the cup and the taking of our sin was supposed to like inherently redefine that relationship. And it's not that we aren't sinners anymore, but that sin has been taken and transferred to Christ. And therefore, I don't know, maybe God got over it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And we're able to be forgiven now.
Yeah. So. I do like your read on it. It's like, oh, I got to experience what it's like to be a human. I'm maybe a little bit more forgiving now, because I always loved, we've talked about this before, but the thing I love about the Jesus story is just this idea that he was just a dude, that he was just like he was just human, and he didn't stop being human until he had died and then became something more. And obviously he was technically a miracle, but like I think it's quintessential to the story that he was man. And I think that's why the story is really fascinating to me. I love it.
Exactly. The Gospels emphasize his humility, right? That they're not stories about how he's like a sort of pharaonic, like above human with his greatness, Greek God figure. The humility is the point of the Jesus story.
Sure.
So I don't know. I kind of thought that. It's just interesting to me because I'm like, if I was crafting this dogma, I would put something in there about like how being a human had sort of caused some of this shift. But I guess there's actually nothing in the catechism about that as far as I can remember. So.
Yeah, and I will leave it up to an actual biblical scholar to come in here and say, Scott, you were 100% wrong about all that stuff, which is fine. I think the most important thing about being a Catholic, or at least being raised Catholic, is that you don't actually ever read the Bible and just believe that your beliefs are probably the right one. So in that regard, I'm doing real good.
Yeah, right. We honestly spent more time studying the Catholic catechism than we did the actual Bible in confirmation school, at least. So.
That is very true. But I still don't know much about it.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
I will never forget where the deacon of my church got asked, do pets go to heaven? And he just goes, no. Asked by a little 8-year-old if pets go to heaven. Nope. No, they don't. All dogs. I think we've talked about this before, but it is scarred in my brain forever.
Not going to sugarcoat it for you, kid. We're pretty clear on this one.
So speaking of Jesus, the two are talking about Larry and what might be troubling him. And Judge has this to say. Larry is a man who found himself comparatively late in life. At least that's how he strikes me. Men who find themselves late are never sure. They are all things the civics books tell us that good citizens should be. Partisans, but never zealots. Respecters of the facts which attend to each situation, but never benders of those facts. Uncomfortable in positions of leadership, but rarely able to turn down a responsibility once it has been offered or thrust upon them. They make the best leaders in democracy because they are unlikely to fall in love with power. Quite the opposite. And when things go wrong, and he goes on to say they tend to blame themselves and take it very hardly. That sounds certainly like a different person than the Larry we met at the beginning of this book, right?
Yeah. I mean, I really like this lens on human beings just in general, setting Larry aside. But yeah, it definitely seems like not only has he changed, but he's changed in a way that's made a big impression on the people that he's, leading.
Yeah.
But I do like this idea that like the best leaders are the people who found themselves late, and thus they have regrets. They have a sense of responsibility, but they don't have a sense of blind certainty. It's a cool idea.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to compare him with Harold, for instance, who is a person who, I guess you could argue, still hasn't found himself, but is absolutely convinced he knows exactly who he is, and how his view on power and his view on getting what he wants are very, very different.
Yeah, I like that.
But the responsibilities of leadership is not the only thing that is bugging Larry, and Lucy knows it because Lucy knows that Larry is in love with his other member of his party, Nadine Cross. So we've kind of crafted this love triangle between Lucy Swan and Nadine Cross and Larry. Like there's some sort of battle for Larry's soul going on here between, again, I will say, a woman named Swan and then Nadine Cross, which is such a I think we can talk about this now, Matt. I think it's such a wonderful, like, harsh name in a lot of ways. Like, she's cross, she's cross with you, but also biblical.
The cross, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting because we always pay attention to names, right? That's one of our things, but it's just interesting how most of the names in this book have not been ones that jumped out to me as being obviously meaningful. But Nadine Cross is one that does feel fairly directly meaningful. The cross being, of course, the instrument of torture, as well as, of course, being the emblem of Christ, right? So it's kind of an interesting duality there. And it's, I don't know. I don't want to jump to the conclusion that like Nadine is definitely 100% bad news, because I don't know. I like stories where people get redeemed, or where people are tempted, but then they make the right decision. So like I want to see Nadine make the right decision, but right now we're building up to this idea of like she's sort of going to be this instrument of the devil.
Yeah, certainly seems like it, right?
Yeah.
So Lucy kind of confronts Larry and steers the conversation towards Nadine. They talk about what the hell is going on with her, and Lucy uses this moment to tell a story about a friend she knew back in school who was cheating on her husband, but was terrified that her husband had spies everywhere watching her at all times. And she says this is kind of exactly how Nadine acts at all times, is that, even when she's around, especially when she's around other men, she kind of acts jumpy, like there's someone out there looking for her, which, I mean, actually turns out to be literally 100% accurate. So very astute of Lucy here.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. The whole love triangle situation between the three of them is interesting, though, because normally when you think of a love triangle, you think of some element of like deception or ignorance.
Yeah.
But actually, like, Lucy's totally aware of everything, and Larry's totally aware of everything. The only real unknown is like why is Nadine being this way? But other than that, it's really the most bizarre love triangle ever.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think like miscommunication is also a very popular method for creating conflict in a love triangle. And
True.
It seems like we're all being very, very upfront with our communication, with the exception of Nadine. That's true.
Yeah.
Then we get this part that I wanted to talk about just briefly. Larry is sitting there with poor Lucy, and he tries to put his arm around her, and she strikes it off. You're getting what you want from me. You don't have to do that. there was still enough of the old Larry in him to wonder if the voice would carry back to camp. I just love that we take this moment in this chapter that we've kind of defined it as, oh, Larry's a good guy now, a decent guy, a man who is seemingly trying very hard to do the right thing, a man who's taking responsibility for everything, maybe overtaking responsibility. We actually learned at the beginning of this chapter that there was a woman that kind of just mysteriously died one day, and they don't know if it was, suicide. They don't know if she just had diabetes, and they just don't know. And Larry took that very hard. He saw that in a similar way to which he saw Nadine, is that he failed this woman somehow. So we have this great image of him, but people aren't binary, right? You don't flip a switch and you're just a new person. So I love that we take the time for this a little bit.
Yeah, me too. I think it's just as you said, we're meant to understand Larry didn't magically totally transform and turn into a totally different character. He's still the same character we knew. And really he hasn't been tested. I think that's an important thing here is all change is incremental, and we won't really know if it's really real until he's really been tested, and the story hasn't gotten there yet.
I'm curious what you think would be a sufficient test that would actually, sufficiently push Larry.
I don't know if I can think of like a specific example, but it would definitely just be something that would require him to put others before himself, in a way that's pretty unambiguous, and there's like infinite ways that could play out, right? But I think that would be the shape that it takes.
Sure. All right. So from here we move to this, and I love, like, basically Lucy is explaining why she's with Larry, and despite knowing about his kind of fascination with Nadine, and she says here, her voice rose suddenly, rough with unexpected power, and for a moment his arms goose-fleshed. I just happen to think love is very important. Only love will get us through this. Good connections. It's hate against us. Worse, it's emptiness. And I just feel like that's very Dark Tower-ish, right? This idea that the opposite of good is not necessarily evil, but just nothingness. And I think that's been kind of a constant refrain throughout the King metaverse, I guess.
Yeah, it's sort of the Discordia concept.
I
really do love this moment. I'm glad you pulled this out, because I think you could look at Lucy as a character and you could read that quote as kind of an empty hippie-ish platitude, a kind of cheap exhortation that love is all you need, man, without actually being willing to sacrifice anything at all for that love. But the way King writes it here, it's like she's tapping into some deep vein of truth. She's tapping into the white, and saying something really profound. And I buy it.
You're so right, because like we could have had this whole conversation without this first sentence. Her voice rose suddenly with unexpected power, but like King wants it to be a sincere moment and a kind of character defining moment for Lucy. And so he makes sure that it's unambiguous to us that there's power attached to this. And it's great. It's really great.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of I'm on my bullshit again, but this is the kind of thing where like a Tolkien character suddenly cries out something in Elvish, and they don't even know Elvish, and it's just like the spirit of the moment of goodness just kind of channels through them in that moment, and it's the actual unexpected power. It's like, yeah, this is something spiritual and good and holy and sort of trustworthy happening here.
Sure. So from here we cut over to Nadine and get her whole deal. And Matt, it's complicated. We learn that she was an adopted child whose adopted family, her both parents and brother, died in a car accident when she was very young. At 16 years old, she suddenly kind of first gets the idea that she must wait for someone. She must remain pure. And who is that someone? Well, of course, it's the Dark Man. It's Randall Flagg. We learned very quickly. And I just love, Matt, I'm going to read this section to you because it's very long, but I just love the way King writes Nadine kind of pontificating about, her role in the world. I
Mhm.
just think it's incredible writing. Listen to this. And where had he been then, her intended, her dark bridegroom? On what streets, what back roads, clocking along in outside suburban darknesses, while inside the brittle clink of cocktail chatter broke the world into neat and rational sections? What cold winds were his? How many sticks of dynamite in his frayed pack-sack? Who knew what his name had been when she was 16? How ancient was he? Where had been his home? What sort of mother had held him to her breast? She was only sure that he was an orphan as she was, his time still to come. He walked mostly on roads that hadn't even been laid down yet, while she had but one foot on those same roads. The junction where they would meet was far ahead. He was an American man, she knew that, a man who would have a taste for milk and apple pie, a man who would appreciate the homely beauty of red check and gingham. And his home was America, and his ways were the secret ways, the highways in hiding, the underground railways where directions are written in runes. I just love all of that. Like this beautiful kind of pontification of on who the Dark Man is. And I don't know, like I know it's technically the narrator writing this, but it feels like this is coming from Nadine.
Yeah, it definitely feels like it's this is the way she thinks of all of this stuff for sure. She has this romantic view of her situation and this psychic connection that she has. It kind of reminds me of like the romance that gets wrapped up in like vampire stories where the vampires are sort of sexualized, and it's like this her dark bridegroom. Like that's such a 16-year-old way of thinking about like the dark brooding handsome man who you're kind of afraid of him, but he has that allure to him, and it's radically different from how we've normally been seeing Flag, right? Like actually totally clashing, honestly, because Flag is just sort of like terrifying and disgusting and horrible. Like disgusting is the wrong word, but like monstrous.
Sure. Yeah.
Not sexual at all is the way that I normally see him.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean,
almost having no sexuality. Yeah.
And she's definitely afraid of him too. That's the kind of, you're absolutely right that there's some kind of weird sense of like allure here, even though she's absolutely terrified of it. That's certainly true.
Yeah. Just another interesting thing here, which again, I remember this is before the Dark Tower, but the phrase highways in hiding, I'm pretty sure that's a phrase that Callahan uses, right? To describe like the idea of like the sort of hidden pathways between the worlds that he travels.
Yep. Hidden highways is how Callahan travels around post Jerusalem's Lot. Yes. See, this is fun because there's things I intentionally leave out of the script because I'm hoping you pick up on them, and then you do, and that's always fun. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, clearly it's not a reference to the Dark Tower because it's before the Dark Tower, but it is an interesting, cross application of this idea of Flag being not entirely of this world, treading roads that haven't been laid down yet. You're like, what does that mean? Like, you're not really clear on what it means. It just gestures at this supernatural sense of a Flag being, the other and something beyond, and not just like a weird dude.
But isn't it fascinating, the structure of the paragraph, because it starts with that, right? It starts with this idea of drawing Flag as this mystical, powerful, magical, unknown. Like where did he come from? How old is he? He must be ancient. Who is his mother? Like all these things. And then we move from that into he was an American man. Who would have a taste for milk and apple pie, who would appreciate the homely beauty of the red check, right? His home was America. Like again and again, we be getting this real, like definitive by the book kind of that is defining Flag as quintessentially American. Like that is something that it's very clear that Stephen King wants us to recognize here, that Randall Flagg, at least as we see him in this book, not necessarily as we see him in the King universe as a whole, but in this book is quintessentially Americana. And I mean, what exactly we're saying with that, I think remains to be seen, but the book is definitely beating that into our head for sure.
Right. This is another moment where I think the book has some good things and some bad things to say about America. And this is one of the most damning things, is like, well, this Antichrist figure is specifically American.
Yeah.
It's so then, moving on from that, there's this idea that Nadine is waiting for him, that she's been chosen by him. And I find myself sitting here being like, I don't understand why she would want that. Like she feels this pull to, you know, the Antichrist, not that she recognizes him as such, but it's a pull towards something that seems like dark and scary. And it causes her to be like, yeah, that's awesome. I can't wait. And this Larry guy is really hot, but I'm totally not going to have sex with him because I'm waiting for Satan. And it doesn't like, and I don't think I'm supposed to get it. It's just supposed to be like, this is just how she's wired. This is just how she is, and this is just who she is. But
Yeah,
I don't know.
I feel like you're trying to rationalize this decision making process in it. I
Yeah.
don't think there's any rationality to it.
Right. It's not like I'm waiting for like an explanation. You know, it's just it's just interesting how it is a deeply irrational sort of place that she's in.
Yeah, and I mean, you kind of feel bad for her too, because this is like 16 years old is when this first began in her life, and her life has been entirely defined by it. This kind of push and pull between the want of this stranger that she doesn't even know but understands is bad, and her desire to be a normal human being living a normal life.
Yeah.
I guess the thing I wanted to talk to you about this is, you know, going back to our religious imagery, you know, this is very specific, right? Like Nadine is the chaste virgin, right? That's saving herself, that, you know, chastity, purity, these are things that are, you know, traditionally seen as holy qualities, right? Like reverential qualities in you know, in Christianity, in you know, this religion in general, right? These are things that, once again, you know, we talked last week about the ways in which Vegas seemed to be not the place that you would typically see associated with sin. You know, like you would see I think our next chapter opens up with like Stu and Glenn like pulling an all nighter and just getting bombed on wine, and it's like that seems like the more thing you would typically see with an evil guy, and instead, no, they are like completely not allowed to do anything like that. And here, once again, these things that you would call good Christian virtues are things being propped up by the enemy. I just think it's really, really fascinating that we're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Again, Nadine, I'm still curious about Nadine. Nadine is still a mystery to me. And I hope we're not going to do some, you know, terrible, sad thing with Nadine, but of course we are. So.
Well, I mean, and again, I'll, you know, compare Nadine with Franny. You know, Nadine is this, you know, seemingly enigma, could go either way, and to your point, you said Franny was, you know, you're relatively certain that she's gonna, you know, start on team good and end on team good, and Franny is pregnant with a child that she had out of wedlock, and Nadine is chaste and pure and saving herself for the one.
Yeah,
it's just really, really fascinating imagery. I like it.
Yeah, that's a fun juxtaposition there, and you can imagine, you know, someone like Franny coming to Jesus and Jesus, you know, accepting her as she is, because like that's the kind of person that Jesus is like, yeah, I'll take all of the downtrodden and the unfortunate and all the, you know, the sinners and what have you. I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought to compare those two characters. That's good.
So into Nadine's life comes, you know, the end of the world, and then Larry, who is a bit of a curveball for Nadine, a temptation, I think, the likes of which she's maybe never faced before. I actually love here we get to see another example of a view on who Larry is, this one coming from Nadine. She calls him kind of an optical illusion, someone that seems very shallow on the surface, but is actually incredibly depth under and complex underneath. I really like that. Once again, we're seeing using other people to point out positive qualities of Larry for our benefit. I like it a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point. A couple different angles. Yeah.
But I'm interested in this paragraph, and I want to talk to you about this. Why dependency, of course? What else could have caused that sudden jangle of jealousy all through her system? If Joe had depended on Larry, that would have been one thing, normal and acceptable. What had upset her was that Larry also depended on Joe, needed Joe in a way she didn't, and Joe knew it. So what do you feel about this? What is your reaction to this kind of codependency between Joe and Larry here?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things. First of all, the problem I think that Nadine is identifying in herself is that she's like not really attached to Joe, despite the fact that she met Joe first and she's been spending time with Joe, and she arguably has had a longer and more complex relationship with Joe. She hasn't attached to him in what you would think of as like the healthy way,
Sure.
where, someone that you care about and that cares about you, it's like, your pain hurts me, my pain hurts you. This is a relationship for better or worse, right? And she doesn't seem to connect to people in that way. Kind of like what Lucy was just saying about how love is going to get us through this, and love actually involves a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
And Nadine, it's like, well, I think, to be blunt, Nadine doesn't love Joe. Like, Joe kind of maybe tried to love Nadine as a mom figure, but she's not really emotionally available in that way. And then I think, in contrast, the other part is Larry is emotionally available. He is available to be a surrogate father to Joe, and Joe is available to be a surrogate son to Larry. And so they form that connection, and there's the two-way street. There's the dependence. Dependence is almost just a pejorative way of saying like love. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, but it seems to me that Nadine just has this sort of arm's length way of thinking about love. I don't know.
I like that a lot, because I think for Nadine, a lot of her obviously extremely complicated emotions around sex are wrapped up in emotions about love as well. Like, because
Mhm.
not only does Nadine choose not to have sex with anyone, but she also basically chooses not to have relationships with anyone. Like, I love this, the line in her kind of backstory thing where it was like, well, she got an apartment and lived with two girls. Which girls? Oh, a bunch of them. She never really,
Mhm.
like, no one important, no one that really mattered. She doesn't seem to have any relationship. She kind of is good at her job, and she cares for the children she's with in a broad sense. But yeah, she doesn't seem to really. She's so wound up in saving herself sexually that she doesn't allow herself to feel anything for anyone. So I think that tracks a lot.
And you can imagine somebody with her life history of having her family, brutally killed,
Yeah,
would have difficulties attaching to people in that way.
that's an interesting point, because like obviously we're wrapping up so much of Nadine's isms with um the idea that there's an actual literal dark man out there that is waiting to make her his bride.
Mhm.
um but like, yeah, you could look at the stuff without the metaphysical stuff going on here and just say, oh, this is a deeply traumatized person who, like, is adopted, did not have a blood family, found a new family, then they died, and has never really been able to find anyone since then.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, because prior to everyone else starting to get these dreams about the Dark Man, she probably just thought of this as like a weird idiosyncratic fantasy of hers, maybe. And then everybody, the world ends and everybody starts talking about nightmares involving the Dark Man, and she understandably freaks out about it, because she's
Yeah.
like, no, 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 this isn't real. Like, this is my weird thing.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I guess I hadn't reflected on her freak out, since reading this part. So
So I guess the other thing I wanted to talk about, and maybe you've kind of already answered this in your redefining of dependence as love here, but like, she calls Larry's dependence on Joe, aka Leo, as abnormal, right? She says it's normal for a child to be dependent on an adult. It's abnormal for an adult to be dependent on a child. I'm just wondering what your take on that is, because I think it's not the same kind of dependence, but I think in Larry's case, I think what it is connection to people and responsibility, and like him Joe depending on him gives him reasons to try to be a better person, and that's a certain kind of dependence in and of itself as well.
yeah, I mean, I think frankly, I see Nadine's framing as a kind of perverse view on just the normal, like it's like I'm not dependent on my children, but I do really want them to do well and to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not happy, and I don't just mean like temporarily happy because I got them a snow cone. I mean, like if they're not like, if they don't seem to be thriving, then that hurts me. So in that sense, I am dependent on their happiness. You could say, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, but that's not in the sense of like, oh, they need to take care of me. It's like, well, no, that's my responsibility. I'm. It's and that's why it's kind of a circle, right? Or a two-way street, as I said before.
Yeah. I like that. Cool. So we learn here that Nadine has never dreamed about Mother Abigail, which is an interesting note, considering that even the trash can man dreamed about Abigail, but Nadine has never dreamed about her. And we also learn that while the dreams of the Dark Man seem to be fading from most people, I think that the dreams have kind of done their job for most people, to either call them to Abigail or to Flag. Nadine's dreams have become only more intense as time has gone on. She continues to dream a Flag again and again and again, and it's becoming more intense. So again, I think that sets up what you were talking about later, that suddenly our emotion surrounding Nadine is not mystery, but concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Overall, just very, very worried, and I guess the most worrying part to me is that she views it as an inevitability. Like,
yeah,
she would really like to sleep with Larry, and sleeping with Larry would even maybe magically break her connection to the Dark Man, but something inside her won't let her.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay,
but I mean, we learn that she does see the Boulder Free Zone as kind of her last hope, that Mother Abigail is kind of her last hope. If anyone's going to free her from this, which I think is the reveal why she was so into the Boulder Free Zone, because it represents freedom in a lot of way to her. But so she kind of is putting a lot of eggs in that basket, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, I mean, we know how that goes, or at least we know how it goes at the beginning.
Yeah.
But I think it's really good, man. I really like Nadine. I don't know if I've appreciated Nadine as much in the past as I'm appreciating her as a character right now.
Yeah, it's probably the most sort of interesting mystery that's in the story right now for me.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right, so we move from here to chapter 50. As we said a little bit ago, this chapter begins with Stu and Glenn pulling an all-nighter and getting trashed on some wine. I'll just make the note again here that this would probably result in their crucifixion if they were in Vegas, which is still just absolutely wild. But they are talking about the future. They're talking about what should be done now that the Boulder Free Zone has been established. There are, I think, 400 people there now, more coming every day. Who knows how many there could be, by the end of the year. And Glenn, kind of being the sociologist, like talks about some of the stuff that you and I have talked about in the past, that there's probably over 1 million people left in the world somewhere. And that due to the strange pull of the dreams, these people are not going to set up small independent communities in their region like they normally would. They're going one of two places. They're going to Vegas or they're going to Boulder. And so we have this much bigger than I think you'd normally see congregation of people that's going to be happening. And so the question of what do we do with society, I think, is more pressing for these people than it would have been in any other kind of post-apocalyptic situation.
Yeah, for sure. And that harkens back to kind of the way that we open the episode, where we're framing this new thesis that I think is opening up, which is, not just a novel about the breakdown of civilization, but it's a novel about the reconstruction of civilization and norms and governance and society. And it's a top to bottom analysis of what a society is, and maybe even a specific analysis of like what's wrong with our society. Because one thing we're going to notice is that they decide to re-implement the federal government of the United States, and which is interesting. I mean, and you're about to get to that, but I guess I'll just say,
yeah, let's go. Let's do it now.
Clearly an intentional sort of authorial choice to be like, here we go. We're going to re-implement the exact same system that ultimately culminated in the end of the world. like, okay, that's a choice, right? Because you could have done any other number of things, but what they chose to do is literally just like hit reboot on the computer.
Yeah, and I think Glenn, his logic is kind of sound in the reasons for the stuff, right? I think he makes the point that like there's no reason why democracy has to come back, really. It's we haven't decided anything yet because people are still kind of shell shocked. But as we gather, like anything could form of this, and so we use the Constitution and the federal government and all that stuff as a way of kind of establishing a set of values they want as a society. But you're totally right that like we had hundreds and hundreds of pages in this book specifically designed to be like, hey, look what happened when this system was allowed to run for as long as it did, and look how many people died because of it. And so there is this moment, I think, this planned, designed, authorial moment of, uh-oh, is that a good thing? Is it a good thing that we're just saying, yeah, let's ratify the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and let's do America again. We're going to redo America. It's going to be great. It's going to be definitely better this time. I think you're supposed to feel a little trepidation at that, the gung-ho-ness of that particular thing.
And look, here's the thing. I'm basically a pretty straightforward American patriot, actually. And the thing about America is like, and as Glenn pretty much says here, like, America is a great response to theocracy or monarchy or all the other ways that this could go, right? So I don't even have a better idea, right? I'm not sitting here to be like, Glenn, idiot. Like, why didn't you put forth, the Singaporean Constitution? It's like, no, like this is in fact the only answer that actually immediately makes sense. It's just, as you said, the story has been set up in a way where you're like, but haven't we been harping on the flaws of this system the entire time?
Yeah.
And
I mean, it represents stability. It represents comfort. Everyone here knows that system. Like, it's much easier to tell people, hey, let's ratify the Constitution of the United States. I mean, people pretty much know what that means. They don't have to spend a week and a half studying the Constitution, although maybe they should. But I think it makes a whole bunch of logical sense. But yeah, I mean, I think there is that underlying, are we sure we want to do this again this way? Are we sure?
Yeah. You're starting from the template that already failed, and it's like, do we really want to revivify the zombie corpse of America, or potentially try something new? And it's like, well, try what new? And it's like, well, nobody really has any ideas. If anybody had ideas, that would be different, but nobody seems to. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't have any ideas. I would not be on the ad hoc committee because I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of responsibility.
Yeah,
I'd be on the podcasting committee.
That's the first order of business, is to set up some sort of podcasting technology. If we're going to get through these long days, we need to be able to.
Yeah.
In the post-apocalypse world, a podcast is just two guys coming into your living room and just chatting to each other without acknowledging you for a couple hours. Then we move on to the next house.
Yeah. Sounds good. Sounds awesome, man.
You tried to skip over something though, and I'm going to go back to it because I think you're embarrassed because Glenn is right. Because
we'll see.
One thing Glenn says here is, when talking about Randall Flagg, he says, I think he's going to get most of the techies. Don't ask me why. It's just a hunch. Except that the tech people like to work in an atmosphere of tight discipline and linear goals for the most part. They like it when the trains run on time. What we've got here in Boulder right now is mass confusion. Everyone bopping along and doing his own thing. And we've got to do something about what my students would have called getting our shit together. But that other fellow, I bet he's got the trains running on time and his ducks in a row. So you are a dark man person, is what that's what he's saying here.
No,
all engineers go to Vegas.
I'm triggered by Glenn here. I'm mad at Glenn.
Just go to Vegas.
I mean, the closest I'll get to like giving him ground here is I'll say like there is like a type of mind for whom disorganization and chaos is like intrinsically ugly and repellent. But I just think it's like literally just empirically false that most tech people like to work in an atmosphere of tight discipline and linear goals. Like that's just first of all, just not what I've observed as a life engineer for 15 years or whatever. I don't know, how old am I? A while, okay. It like and also and I'll just also say, like, where do techies live? Techies live in major cities, which are characteristically chaotic and messy places. Sure. I don't know. See, I hate to like come out swinging at Stephen King, so I'm going to come out swinging at Glenn here.
That's okay, because Glenn's kind of a prick, so we can do it.
And I'll just say, Glenn, it's a little self-serving of you to imagine that technical people have rigid and inflexible minds when fuck you, Glenn.
Well, I mean, I guess the question that's maybe worth asking here is, have tech people changed in the last 30 years, right? This book was written in 1978. Mm-hmm. What a techie was in 1978 and what a techie was in even 1990 when the book was re-released, certainly much different than what I think we'd call a techie today. First of all, I don't even think we'd use the word techie.
No, the thought occurred to me that the stereotype used to be like the guy with the flat top haircut and the polyester shirt and the pocket protector, Michael Douglas and Falling Down, like just kind of a conservative, useful idiot, right? And now the stereotype is like radically different in all sorts of ways. So so I think that might be a big factor. I agree with you actually that is probably like factoring into the reason why King is framing it this way.
Sure. So Glenn proposes that they need to have a meeting, and what he does at that meeting is that they need to ratify the Declaration of Independence, all that stuff we talked about. But on top of that, they're going to form an ad hoc committee in order to organize the election of a permanent committee that will be voted on by the people. But also, as we're told, they're going to arrange it so the committee itself will be voted into the permanent power position. It's just so fascinating to me to, again, in this book where we talk about all the mistakes that were made, we have two men kind of sitting there on their own talking about exactly how they're going to take control of the government. They're going to set up, they're going to do it. We're going to do democracy, but like, we're going to win. We're going to design it to where we win and we get to make the decisions here. I don't know. What do you think about that?
It is interesting because like sitting there with the characters, you can pragmatically see the logic behind it, right? You're I mean, it just makes sense that we should be the ones who are in charge because we're the ones who are taking the actions. But at the same time, it's like, man, I immediately remember like the story of George Washington refusing to allow them to make him the king and being like, okay, I was leader for a bit, I'm done now. Which is so important to the foundational mythos of America that it's almost a different story without George Washington's choices there. And here they got their finger on the scale. They're not really making decisions that way. And it's a very different situation, obviously, but still, I don't know. I think you're meant to notice it, like you've pointed it out here.
You're so right. I mean, I'm gonna say a shocking thing right here, where we underrate George Washington in America. What? But I think that choice to abdicate power was one of the most important choices ever made in the history of our country. Possibly the world. And totally, huge. And so, I mean, there is a distinct difference there. And again, you're totally right that the logic checks out. I'm not like actually criticizing their logic or their choices here. There is just like a taste that it leaves you with of like, oh, so you've just decided you're going to be in charge now, huh? Okay, sure.
Great.
What about all these other people who have probably equally compelling stories that we just haven't gotten to know yet? Maybe they want to be in charge.
No, they're not point of view characters, Scott.
Yeah, well, they haven't been touched by God.
Oh,
God,
well, that's right. But that's a whole other thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the way the conversation ends as well. Is like they're going to create this government, they're going to put themselves in charge of it, but they need to acknowledge that Mother Abigail has to play a role in this somehow because she is like the messiah figure for everyone that's coming into town, due to these dreams, right? So they she has to be involved in it somehow. And Glenn's fear in this is like, well, if we put ourselves up as like a council of seven that is overseen by a representative of God, haven't we just created an actual theocracy, like in totality? And the answer to that is kind of yes.
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, so this is the most questionable and shaky bit of the whole thing is like the compromise is, well, we're just going to give her veto power.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, okay, but like that's like the way negotiation works is a veto is never just a veto. A veto carries with it the power to negotiate and to say
Right.
like, yeah, sure, I'll approve your mandate as long as you tack on this, this, and this that I want to see happen,
Yeah.
which is now, it's basically theocracy with extra steps. And, I mean, like that, funnily enough, like the president, okay, at this point in history, the president can do all kinds of crazy shit. But originally, the president, like one of the president's primary powers was actually just the veto. So they've sort of made Mother Abigail the permanent president in a certain sense.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's really interesting. Again, we're not, I don't want to make it seem like we're specifically criticizing the choices they're making, but I do think this is all very intentionally designed by King to make you go, huh, okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Sure. Yeah. So I just want to say before we move from this, though, it is interesting that Glenn and everyone else, frankly, is still kind of refusing to attach any higher significance to what's going on here. So they all had dreams of a person that really existed and of an evil person that they're assuming really existed, and we know in fact it does. And they're really trying as hard as they can to not attach any kind of greater significance to that. Like, I think Glenn says specifically, I will not believe we're pawns in a giant game of good and evil between God and the devil or anything, which is kind of, the book has kind of told us is exactly what's happening. But it's just like, this is kind of back to our vampire question from months and months and months ago of like, at what point does crazy inexplicable stuff need to keep happening to you before you just kind of go, okay, sure, whatever, it's some sort of magic shit is happening, I don't know.
Yeah, right. Like am I the one who's off base? And wouldn't it maybe be more rational in some sense for them to just be like, yeah, let's just have Abigail be the queen, because clearly she's the one who's been chosen by God to be our leader. Obviously, clearly. I don't know, man. I don't know how to think about this.
Yeah, there's no right answer here, I don't think.
Yeah,
but we need to move on. So from here we go over to Mother Abigail herself, who is getting used to her new house filled with gadgets that she honestly never even thought that she would own. But of course, they're all useless because there's no power. But we learn here that they will have power because Mother Abigail says they would get the power back on, of course. It was one of the things God had showed her in her dreams. She knew a goodish number of things about what was to come here, some from the dreams, some from her own common sense. The two were too intertwined to tell apart. So it's interesting that obviously God has shown her a lot that's going to happen. And she hasn't shared that with anyone, really. She's kind of keeping that really close to the chest here.
Yeah, it's a fascinating. I'm not going to say that Abigail is secretly the villain, but but it is interesting that we are setting up a foundation of conflict between her and our other good guy characters. I definitely anticipate some friction between, because they want different things, right? Like she knows that this confrontation with cosmic evil is coming, and that's all she cares about. And that's just so misaligned with what, basically everybody on the council wants, which is like, we want to have a nice, safe town to live in.
Yeah.
Just not acknowledge that, like, that's not the book that we're in.
Yeah. Don't you guys realize we're in a book? Yeah. I mean, I also kind of like this idea about, her common sense and her dreams, her prophetic dreams are getting like mixed up and intertangled because, like, again, in another story, you could believe that, oh, she's just hallucinating and thinking she's being spoken to by God, and this is all just herself. Obviously that's not the story we're in, but like just introducing the fact of like, oh yeah, her common sense and her prophetic dreams are kind of all mixed up and jangled in her head, that she doesn't even really know where one ends and the other begins. It's like, oh really, okay, well that feels like an important thing to know, um, from your ordained by God, um, representative in the story.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really interesting.
um I do really like this part where Mother Abigail basically guesses what's going to happen next, and the reason we know that she guesses this correctly is because we just had a conversation with Stu and Glenn in which everything that Mother Abigail says is going to happen next is exactly what they were talking about. So it's again this really fun structural technique of having that conversation first and then cutting over to this allows us to immediately just go, oh, so she's clever and wise, and it's not just that she's a good nice old lady, but she's actually very very knowledgeable and clever about these kind of things.
Yeah, that's true. It's important to remember that she's not just like the woman of prophecy. She's also a wily and canny agent on her own.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing she says is that she won't like it if they put Harold on their council.
Mm-hmm.
That she doesn't like Harold, she doesn't trust Harold, which immediately endears her to us forever because we don't like Harold very much. But I think it's interesting that she says that, like, but she also says, but I won't stop them if they do it, right? It's this really interesting, like she's so concerned with Randall Flagg that she really doesn't want to have any say in anything, any other decision making that doesn't have to do with that, including, I think this guy's bad news. I don't trust him. I think there's something weird going on here. But if you want to put him in a position of power, sure, go for it. I won't stop you.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the first beats in the several beats of basically lots of people intuiting that Harold is bad news, but none of them really acting on it because, after all, it is just intuition.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible to justify any sort of radical action against Harold on the basis of a bad feeling. The most you can really justify is like, I don't really want to work with him on the council, and even that is it. They almost have a hard time justifying even that. It's just something they're just going to do,
Yeah.
But I think retroactively later they will wish they had done something.
Sure. I think we'll talk a lot more about that as we go through this week's reading.
Yeah.
So then she moves to discuss Flagg, or at least think about Flagg a little bit. And I just wanted to pull this point out. He had no name, although it pleased him to call himself Flagg, at least for the time being. Which, I mean, it's just kind of the ongoing mythology of Randall Flagg is just really fascinating, right? Because we learned a lot about him in the Dark Tower, but then we've seen like so many different variations and versions of him that it makes you wonder, is this even really the same guy? Or is this just a guy that happens to be calling himself Randall Flagg? And oh, that's another guy also called himself Randall Flagg. And I mean, I don't have an answer for you there. I'm just kind of thinking out loud.
I mean, I feel like there are many different Flaggs, honestly. Like it's I don't know how to think about this, but I just feel like it's got to be something like what you just said.
Sure. All right. King again summons some Tolkien here when he has Abigail call God a creator. And because man was made in God's image, we all carry that desire to create as well, or to subcreate, if you will. But the true evil of this world, the actual evil, the evil that's beyond just the deeds of men, is uncreation. Anti-creation, and that's what Flagg represents to her: chaos, nothingness, anti-creation. This is pretty. I mean, like I said, this is Tolkien, right? This is the Tolkien worldview to a T. I think
I was actually shocked and delighted at how directly taken from Tolkien's philosophy this was. I mean, this is almost proof that at some point long ago, Stephen King read some of Tolkien's actual essays on subcreation and so forth. Because
I'm almost positive that he did. Yeah,
it's such a clear shout out, right? And I was freaking out. It wasn't until years after I read Lord of the Rings that I really became aware of Tolkien's whole philosophy of subcreation. Just briefly, for people who may not know, like the idea here is something we've talked about a bit in the Dark Tower, where it's like, yeah, everything people create is really, people are creations of God, and so our creations are God creating through us as vessels. And so Middle Earth and the world of the Stand are both creations of God, which are sub-created through their respective authors. And it's, and then you look at the Dark Tower and you're like, well, yeah, that's really similar to how the Dark Tower mythos is actually set up, where the Dark Tower itself is a creation of Gan via the beam of the turtle via Stephen King, and it's all about subcreation and channeling of creation down from some source, and it's just really cool to see it shouted out so explicitly.
Yeah, it's really great. I love it so much. And again, the echo of what Nadine was talking about, or I think it was Lucy, with like the opposite of love, right? Once again, we have this echo here where the true bad is nothingness, is the anti creation, is the not evil but non-existence as a whole. Is the big bad, which I think also aligns with the Crimson King and the ideal to bring the tower down is to the tower represents creation in both meanings of that word, the creation of art, the creation of story, and also the creation of existence and order and a world, and they want to tear all that down.
And tear it down into the abyss of chaos. And
also, Abigail has a rather unflattering view on her creator. I love how she describes God here. God was a gamesman. If he had been mortal, he would have been at home hunkering over a checkerboard on the porch of Popman's general store back in Hemmingford Home. He played red to black, white to black. She thought that for him, the game was more than worth the candle. The game was the candle. He would prevail in his own good time, but not necessarily this year or in the next 1,000. So again, this is not like a wonderful, like endlessly generous, graceful God. This describing God as a gamesman is really fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's this impersonal, unloving, unchristlike view of God. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, this God that like the idea that he knows he's going to win, but he's not in a rush to actually do it, because what do these lives matter in the grand scheme of things?
Just like who cares if I have to sacrifice my knights and bishops and pawns? I'm going to win eventually.
And what do we do? Like, and I guess the broader question to ask is, what are we supposed to feel about that? Are we supposed to go, yeah, I mean, that's God's doing his thing? Are we supposed to just be like, yeah, we should just go along with it, knowing that we're pawns in this big game that's happening here,
right? Because that's the problem. Is like, well, it's definitionally good, and it's like, well, that's not how words work. If he's doing bad things, then it's no longer good. I'm sorry. But I guess maybe Mother Abigail would say, yeah, but it's for the greater good in the end. And it's like, well, that's an article of faith, which is of course the whole problem, I guess.
Yeah. And I think we'll be talking more about that as we go through the book for sure. So Ralph shows up to chat with Mother Abigail. Ralph, I don't know if you remember Ralph, Matt, but he is the man who picked up Nick and Tom in his car not long after their encounter with Julie. We really hadn't known much about this guy. I think the only thing we've learned is that he's pretty resourceful. He's the one that actually named it the Boulder Free Zone, and kind of like established the CB system that allowed them to broadcast messages to people to kind of lead them here. So that's kind of the big thing we know about Ralph, but we're about to learn a whole lot more. And I want to read this section because I love it so much. And I think this is one of King's greatest strengths here, because he has Mother Abigail just kind of sum up Ralph in this way that I just love. He wasn't the kind of man who wouldn't be afraid to try epoxy on your tractor battery when it started to split open. And if the epoxy did the job, why, he'd just take off his shapeless hat and scratch his balding head and grin like he was an 11-year-old kid with the chores done and his fishing pole leaning against his shoulder. He was a good sort to have around when things weren't going just right, and the type of man who always somehow ended up on relief when times were flush for just about everyone else. He could put the right sort of valve on your bicycle pump when it wouldn't mate to a tire bigger than the kind it went on a bike, and he knew what was making that funny buzzing noise in your oven just by looking at it. But when he had to deal with a company time clock, he'd somehow always end up punching in late and punching out early and getting fired for it before very long. He'd know you could fertilize corn with pig shit if you mixed it right, and he'd know how to pickle cukes. But he would never be able to understand a car loan agreement or to figure out how the dealers managed to rook him every time. So I read this and it was like, oh, I immediately understand who this person is. Like I just have this perfectly clear, perfectly summed up, wonderful explanation of exactly who this guy is. And I don't fully know how King does this so efficiently and effectively, but he does. It's remarkable.
Because the beautiful thing is there's no specific archetype of, oh yeah, that type of guy.
Yeah, no.
And yet you still feel like, yeah, I know that guy.
I've met people like that. I've met people like that are like super smart, super resourceful, like always can like help you with anything you need, but like don't do well in society, right? Just don't like fit in the standard things that are expected of people.
And what you just said there is a perfect succinct explanation of that type of guy, but it's the way Stephen King lays it out in like examples in these highly salient visual examples. That's really what makes it sink in and just feel like you know this character.
This is how you bring emotion into it, right? This is how you expand it from just a thing talking about a type of human being to a story in which you feel and react to things. Because if you did it the way I did it, you'd be like, okay, I think I know who that guy is, but I don't think you'd feel anything. Now we have this emotion attached to Ralph. We have these specifics. We have these the idea of we have the image in our head. The idea of a guy just, oh, your battery's splitting, better throw some epoxy on it. Oh, look, it worked, and I'm so happy it worked. I'm like, I take so much pleasure out of just fixing something, like just trying a thing and it working and being like, that's remarkable. And I love it. Yeah. It's so good, man. I love this so much. And I think it immediately endears you to Ralph too, which is another thing that King obviously wants you to do here. We don't know Ralph from Adam, and suddenly we're immediately like half a page, like totally endeared to this guy.
Yeah, I also like the fun trick of sort of forcing you to imagine Ralph as like an 11-year-old boy with a fishing pole on his shoulder. It's like, how can I help but love this guy? And it's not even that the text says like that's what really happened. It's like, no, it's an image that nonetheless makes you feel that way about him and love him.
Yeah, it's great. It really is. I love it.
Yeah.
King does this so effectively. He really does. I mean, it's kind of everywhere in this chapter, not just with Ralph. There's just so many moments of just emotional summation of who people are that I just like, you read it and you're like, wow.
Yeah, I love it.
So Ralph tells Abigail the news that we already kind of know about, that they're forming an ad hoc committee, and that Ralph himself has been tasked to see if he can print flyers, informing everyone in Boulder about them. Abigail supports him, and then she moves on to go meet the newest members of the zone, which of course ends up being Larry and his party of 19. I really love this moment as she goes to meet him. She sees these people coming to meet him, and she talks about pride. She says here, the father of sin was theft, but the mother of sin is pride. And she looks at these people coming here to see her, and she feels pride. What was your kind of reaction to that?
So I love this scene. It's extremely fascinating. And this is the point where I make the direct parallel to the moment in the Fellowship of the Ring where the Fellowship first meets Galadriel, which parallels this scene in a lot of ways.
Sure.
I feel like this is one of my more certain parallels, actually, because first of all, I remember that as being kind of a tense scene in the Fellowship, because if I recall correctly, you don't really understand the motives of Galadriel at this point. And she's sort of cast as this mildly foreboding, powerful figure. She's dangerous. And here we have Abigail as the psychically powerful ancient elf goddess in the Lothlorien Free Zone. It's just too perfect of a match. And then, of course, you have Larry and co coming to sort of pay court to her, as their own fellowship, with, I guess, Larry I guess Larry's the Frodo here. I don't know. I don't necessarily need to nail it down that hard, but like,
Sure.
I'd even go so far as to say like Galadriel as a character is a really excellent parallel for Abigail, because I think Galadriel's character flaw was always pride, actually. And this is not something that was super foregrounded in the Lord of the Rings, because Galadriel is really a minor character in the Lord of the Rings, but her whole deal was actually like thinking that she was the one who was gonna go defeat the evil with her brothers and so forth, and really, and she was incredibly powerful. So in some sense, this is like justified pride, but also she was banned from returning to Valinor because she wouldn't sort of lower her eyes to the gods, and that's so saying that Abigail's sin is the sin of pride. I just was immediately like, yes, that's like such a close parallel. And it's like, well, in that case, I wonder what is Abigail's moment of character change, which is not something I've really thought about, because Abigail seems so perfect, right? She seems so
sure
above it all. And I'm wondering if like, well, is King rarely lets anybody just be static. Like, is she being set up for her own shift? Because, Galadriel is tested. Galadriel passes her test. What is Abigail's test? Is it going to look anything similar?
Sure.
I'm very curious to see if this parallel continues to work for me.
Definitely never thought about any of this in my life, but I dig it. I like it a lot.
Great. Good.
All right. So Larry and Lucy have a fairly normal, if not slightly magical meeting. But I think the thing we got to talk about here is Nadine's meeting with Abigail, because she sees Nadine and almost immediately feels fear. She feels like the dark man is here now. He's here, right there. I'm looking at him. He comes in many disguises, and one of them is this woman, and she's right in front of me, and I have to do something about it. And for her part, Nadine sees Abigail, and what she sees is a frail old lady. I love the writing here. He's in her, the devil's imp, Abby Fremantle thought. All of the power is right here, Nadine thought in her own turn. She's all they've got, although they may think differently. And so it's this really, really powerful moment. I really like the writing here just in general. The kind of the standoff that goes on between the two of them. There's so much energy in the writing here, and we kind of like watch as this incredibly important moment just kind of slowly fades from Abigail's mind, and we're like, no, this is so fucking important. What are you doing? It's so great. It's so great.
Yeah, no, it is a moment where you're just like, oh no, she clearly missed the opportunity to act on this very strong intuition that she should do something about Nadine, and she's distracted from it. And it's like, yeah, you feel really bad about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, there's like we watched Silver Bullet not too long ago for the Other Levels of the Tower episode, right? And there's a scene in Silver Bullet, spoilers for that movie if you care, where the main character Marty is talking to the priest, who is the werewolf. He's the werewolf, and they both know that the other person knows the truth, right? And so they're having a lot of like very kind of pointed, barbed conversation with each other. And there's a moment in this chapter that reminded me a lot of that this week, where Nadine is saying things like, "Oh, Joe, you have to get away from her because she's actually really old and tired and not very strong." And it's like this, like they're kind of verbally sparring in that way, and that's really enjoyable too. I really like that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it was, and everyone around them kind of detects like, what the hell is going on between these two?
What is this? Yeah,
but then it sort of passes. It gets brushed away by the momentum of the moment, and nothing comes of it. And overall, you're just like, man, somebody should have done something.
Yep, definitely. So before the scene ends, though, we also learn a little bit more about Joe. We learn that, of course, we knew Joe's name was not actually Joe, but here we learn that it's Leo. He is so kind of immediately comfortable and in some ways healed by the presence of Mother Abigail that he finally says who he is. And so we learn that this is Leo. It's little Leo.
Yep. No, it's fun. I love watching Joe's shift from this point forward. Just his transformation. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Now we move over to be back with our one-eyed boy Nick as he sits in his room pondering his and humanity's future. This is another note of what you kind of set up earlier of Harold concern, right? That he's kind of thinking about Harold generally and how he doesn't like him. But there's another thing here that I wanted to talk to you about, which is one of the things he's thinking about is that there's not enough corpses in Boulder. That they've kind of started going through the houses, and there's not as many dead people as there should be here, and like this is the thing that I just wanted to remind you of because it's a moment that we kind of let pass by. There was a point earlier in the book, kind of a throwaway reference, that there was some rumor that broke out when things were really starting to get crazy with the plague stuff, that there was a biological weapons installation in Boulder, Colorado. And so the people of Boulder, Colorado learned this and in their panic fled the town. And so it happens to be one of, if not the only, relatively empty and corpseless towns left in America. So, God is a gamesman, but no, he's good looking out, right? He less corpses to clean up.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I keep thinking there might be some other special things about Boulder, but I don't know what exactly. Like, what the thing that comes to mind for me is I live like, I don't know, an hour at most away from Boulder, so like it's an incredibly beautiful spot. It's probably among the most beautiful cities I've ever visited. Maybe the most beautiful at the right time of year. So like that to me, it's just sort of a fun visual contrast between the beauty of Boulder and like the desolate hellscape of Las Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, it is also like, this is not literally true, but like I think narratively true that it sits at this kind of pass from the west to the east, right? It's in the middle of the Rockies. Obviously there are other ways to get through the Rockies. You don't have to go through Boulder and Boulder alone, but it does kind of serve as like the hot gates in a way of like, if you're going to spread out across the rest of the country, you're going to have to come through here. And so it is a place that we can have our stand.
I like that. Yeah, that's great.
So Nick is thinking about Law and Order as he's sitting here, not the show. That didn't start till September of 1990. So unfortunately, no one in this world will ever get to see Dick Wolf's wonderful show that went on for 7 million episodes, and it's still going on, right?
Yeah, as far as I know.
Technically, he's thinking about the words authority and organization, which is a much worse title for a show. But I love this idea being presented here, though, of this what now? Like you've already talked about this a little bit, but this like, we've made this trek. We're in this place now, and what do we do now? What is life now? What is this thing? And the realistic reasonings of Nick here is people are going to do crime. we are the quote unquote good guys, but we're still human beings, and people are going to hurt people. People are going to steal shit. People are going to misbehave. Gosh, there could be murders. There haven't been, but there could be. And so it's like, what do we do about that? What do we do about law and order? What do we do about authority? Who do we give authority to detain and arrest people? And this is kind of happening separate from the Stu Glenn conversation, so I don't think he knows specifically about we're just bringing back the Constitution, Nick, don't worry about it. But I love the ideas of having these thoughts. Like, I don't think a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff go through this. They just kind of yada yada over the reforming of government.
Yeah, I love how we have positioned Nick to be the guy who is thinking about this in a practical sense, because his first moment in the story was being attacked by a bunch of drunk assholes, and then helped out of that situation by a sheriff, a man of the law with a very strong moral code. And then he spent the whole first part of the book, like literally, caring for people in a jail. So this has been woven throughout his whole story. And I think he's well suited to be the guy who would be having these thoughts.
Yeah, and he's traumatized by that experience, right? Because he didn't just care for them. He watched 2 of them die behind bars and the other beg to be let out. So like, he's the one contemplating what it means to lock someone up, the importance and the seriousness of that act of stripping someone of their freedom and putting them behind bars, and
yeah,
how do we decide who gets to do that?
right. And be, contemplating being the guy who takes it upon himself to be like, I am the law, right? Like it's a very weird and kind of scary thought to be like the first guy who's going to be like, I'm putting on this badge and putting this gun on my hip, and now I'm the guy who gets to arrest people and shoot them if they try to do the wrong thing, and none of you can do anything about that, and that's the agreement.
These are things we take for granted, right? These are things that just exist, and so we just don't think about it very much. But yeah, like at some point someone has to say, you have to do what I say now, and everyone in this society has agreed that is the case, or even if they haven't agreed, perhaps they're kind of powerless to do anything about it.
Yeah, because everybody else will line up behind the authority.
Yeah. It's a matter of fact, simple truism, but it's just so fascinating seeing it like laid out like that.
Yeah, that's the fun part about this part of the book to me, actually.
Mm-hmm. So Nick later meets up with Ralph, and they're looking over the poster for the first committee meeting. We see who our 7 ad hoc committee members are. They are Nick Andros, Glenn Bateman, Ralph Bretner, Richard Ellis, Fran Goldsmith, Stuart Redmond, and Susan Stern. And I'm just wondering your reaction to these 7 people are, Matt. Like, any names on here that surprised you? You have any questions about?
Well, to state the obvious, we barely know Susan or Richard. I can't really place them, Ralph, we know a tad more due to that delightful description that we got. The rest of the characters have obviously been with us for a while, including Glenn. I feel like Stu specifically, if Stu weren't with Fran, then he wouldn't be super interested in a leadership role. But because he is with Fran, then he's going to do it. I don't know if that's entirely fair, but that's just my view of Stu, and as for Franny specifically, we know she is the type to straighten bad pictures in strange hotel rooms. So it makes sense that she would be on there.
Totally. We don't know Richard Ellis very well at all. Susan Stern is one of the women that they freed from captivity by the terrible doctor. But you're right. We don't really know who she is very well. And honestly, like, I've read this book like 5 times, and I looked at this list and I go, who the fuck is Dick Ellis? I don't remember this guy at all. And of course the reason for that is because he doesn't actually wind up on the committee. So that's why I've forgotten him. And the story kind of reminds you who he is too. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that guy. But yeah, no, my first thought was not, oh yeah, Richard Ellis, that old buddy.
Yep, my favorite character.
Mm-hmm. So the one thing we do see is that Nick did put his foot down and refuse to let Harold be on the list. That's something he kind of said he was going to do, and he did it. Harold is not on the committee. Thank goodness. You don't have to worry, Mother Abigail. He's not on there. Which, I mean, is that a good thing? What's your thought on this, Matt?
Yeah. Okay. So hard to say, right? Because you can imagine that if you gave him a seat on the council, then his anger that we're about to get a deep dive into would be channeled and he would be put to productive use, and he would feel like he was part of things, and he couldn't have and as it is, he's just going to have this like resentment at being left out, and the unfairness of it all. He's going to be able to keep telling himself this narrative. Now the thing about a person like Harold is I don't want to just say like, yeah, if somebody seems scary and dangerous, give them power. Like, no, that doesn't make sense either, right? So there's not actually just like a clean solution to this problem.
This scary, dangerous person might react badly if we don't give him power. So let's give him power. Yeah. It's a shitty situation for sure. But I mean, it is really interesting, and this is something I want to breach with you again later. Like, it seems like Harold's fooling nobody, right? Like he's kind of put this mask on himself, and almost every character that matters is seeing through it, at least on a subconscious level.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, King is great at articulating the way in which people will detect if somebody is just off, and they won't be able to put their finger on it. They won't be able to say here's a good justification for why we can't trust this guy, but they will generally come to a consensus of like, yeah, I don't like that guy.
Sure. So we have the next section ends with this, and I just wanted to read this and get your reaction. He suddenly felt that he had joined some bizarre sewing circle of the human spirit. He and Redmond and Bateman and Mother Abigail, yes, even Ralph with his big radio and his boosting equipment that set the free zone signal flying far and wide across the dead continent. They each had a needle, and perhaps they were working together to make a warm blanket to keep off the winter chill. Or perhaps they had only, after a brief pause, began once again to make a large shroud for the human race, beginning their work at the toes and working their way up.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, that's not great.
Right. And I think this is the closest that this chapter gets to nodding in the direction of the idea of like, wait a second, hold on a second. Do we really need to be just restarting the same machine that killed everybody the first time?
I love it's a shroud. They're knitting they're knitting a death shroud for America once again, for humanity once again. It's perfect. I love it so much.
But I'm sure it's nothing. It's just he's just kidding, folks.
No, yeah, it's totally fine. Yeah. So from here we move over to Franny, who, after making sweet lovin', steps out onto her balcony to take in the night Boulder air. By the way, we learn in next chapter that it still like reeks of dead and decay. So like she's just going out there to go.
It's great. That's great.
But while she's up there, she sees Larry approach the apartment complex, and Larry is here to kind of meet the herald that led him through the country. He's got a bottle of wine and he's got some payday candy bars, and he's here to kind of meet and thank Harold for, in a lot of ways, saving his life. And he doesn't find Harold. Harold apparently originally moved into this apartment building with the rest of them, but went off to live on his own, which is an ill omen.
Yeah, that's an ominous choice. Yes. The interesting thing about like the smell is just something where that's just really struck me as one of these great sort of physical details that I have never seen portrayed well anywhere else. And I've never smelled a human corpse, but a long time ago I did.
I'm glad, Matt. I'm really
personally
glad.
I mean, maybe, right? But I did encounter like a dead rotting cow, like half rotted cow in a field one time, and like it was like the worst thing I've ever smelled by like a fair margin. It was quite horrifying, and like from a distance away the smell was pretty bad. And I think that in modern life we're able to just not be aware of how of the horrible stench of decaying animal, which of course humans would smell roughly as bad as a cow, I think. So yeah, just the idea of just the smell of death everywhere, I think, is something that is a great thing to put in the story, because it totally would be the case. Although eventually I think they'll just rot to the point that they don't smell anymore. So
yeah, there you go. Problem solves itself.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
So Larry starts kind of spilling his life story to Franny. He tells everything that we already know about him. And I think, that alone, I think, is an important signifier of change in Larry as well, right? I think we talked about this when he first met Nadine, that the story of Rita was a story of shame. The story of his life is a story of him kind of being chastised by people better than him. And the fact that he's able to just earnestly and honestly tell what in essence amounts to a complete stranger about his bad qualities, I think is a signifier of a man that's changing.
Yeah, totally. I agree. It's a great moment. It's really kind of refreshing.
Mm-hmm. So we learn that basically Larry throughout his entire journey here has kind of built up Harold to be almost like a messianic figure, right? Like he says literally he changed it to what would Harold do, and every time he encountered a problem he wasn't sure how to solve, and a difficulty he wasn't sure how to overcome, he thought about Harold and what Harold would do, and it gave him the strength to carry on, the strength to come up with a new solution, the strength to survive, basically. And he's here to thank Harold for that. And I really love kind of the couple of implications this has. The first is that the Harold that Larry is talking about does not exist, right? He's not a real person. He's a complete completely created person in the head of Larry Underwood. And Franny almost immediately says this to him, right? He says, like, no, Harold didn't help you do any of those things. You did them yourself. Harold didn't solve the problem for you. You solved the problem for yourself. And so that's like an important thing that I think Larry needs to realize. And like, he really wants to put his success all on this other person, but his success was because of him ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. And I didn't even think about it that way, but yeah, you're right.
The other bit is that Franny, that kind of seeing the way Larry reacts to Harold, and the things about Harold that Larry noticed that Franny failed to, she feels a little guilt about it. Like, she feels a little guilty about the way she treated him, and the bits of the resourcefulness that he did have that she really didn't give enough credit to, which is an interesting wrinkle to introduce in this chapter, in which we basically kind of declare Harold a baddie in a lot of ways. So like I don't know, what is your kind of reaction to Franny feeling guilty about treating Harold the asshole in the ways that she treated him?
It is very interesting. Yeah. If somebody does a lot of objectively useful things, but they're constantly unpleasant and irritating on an interpersonal level, I think we like to imagine that we could overlook their foibles and just appreciate them for their positive qualities. But I think the fact is that just doesn't turn out to be the case almost ever. Like, yeah. I really think this is a sad truth about humans, but there needs to be a kernel of likability somewhere in a person. Sheer competence doesn't really cut it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is, the thing that King is sort of looking at here is like, maybe even causing us to ask, like, is it fair to treat a person like Harold the way that he's been treated just because he's extremely obnoxious to be around? And it's like, well, I don't know if it's fair, but that is the way it would be, because I don't know, you just can't overlook somebody being just a massive jack off.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think yes, they could have done a better job at recognizing the ways in which Harold helped the group, but at the same point, it's very easy to look back on it now and say, oh yeah, look at all those important things Harold did, when in the present moment, the things that you were feeling about Harold was, this guy makes me physically uncomfortable when he's around me. I do not like being around this person. I am immediately made uncomfortable. He's always rude. He's always taking a bad situation and making it worse. So yeah, I mean, hindsight's 2020, but I don't, like, I guess my conclusion is here, I don't think Franny did anything wrong in the ways that she treated Harold or thought about Harold.
No, and honestly, it's probably the opposite, because I think that she gave him quite a lot of chances. They traveled together for a long time. She was very generous to him gave him a lot of opportunities to kind of not be interpersonally egregiously obnoxious, and he eventually decided, because she ultimately rejected his sexual advances, that she is horrible and deserves to die, basically.
Yep. Yeah. All right. So the section kind of ends with Franny's reaction, like, causing something in Larry. Like, he thinks he might have the wrong interpretation of who Harold is, but Franny kind of doesn't want to go into further detail about exactly why. And so she kind of sits there musing about, what do I do? How do I tell this person who Harold actually is? Was she supposed to tell him that the sometimes sulky, often frightened Harold that had come to Boulder from Ogunquit had turned into a stout politician, a backslapper, a hail fellow, well-met type of guy who nonetheless looked at you with the flat and unsmiling eyes of a Gila monster? I love that. That's so much.
Yeah. I think that somewhere in here, King kind of obliquely compares Harold to George Bush Sr., which, knowing King, is the most damning indictment imaginable.
So true. Unfortunately, in this moment, Franny feels her baby move for the first time and completely forgets about Harold and the Harold problem. And so from here, we move on to the Harold problem. We move into Harold's point of view once again, and we see here that he is worse than we could have possibly thought. We see he's become a man that is absolutely fueled and relishes in hatred of everything and everyone. I love how this section opens with Harold sitting there looking at the sky and thinking of an old rock and roll song. And then it says he hated rock. And it's like, Larry, I'm sure you're going to get along great with this guy.
Who hates rock?
Yeah, nobody hates rock.
It's like saying you hate music.
Yeah, I don't really care for music. Yeah. But the book poses kind of a simple question, almost literally asking Harold a simple question. Why do you hate so much? And here's Harold's answer. Hadn't Einstein said there were only 6 people in the world who understood all the implications of E equals mc squared? What about the equation inside his own skull? The relativity of Harold, the speed of blight. Oh, he could fill twice as many pages as he had already written about that, becoming more obscure, more arcane, until he finally became lost in the clockwork of himself and still nowhere near the mainspring of it all. He was perhaps raping himself. Was that it? It was close anyway, an obscene and ongoing act of buggery.
Man, shit.
Wonderful writing.
Speed of Blight is my favorite. So good.
Oh, it's so good. Relativity of Harold. Yeah. Speed of Blight. Yeah.
So I think the technical sort of clinical term for what's happening to Harold here is that he's disappeared up his own asshole.
Oh my God. It's like, you're not that complicated, Harold. I'm sorry. And he can't even answer the question, right? Like, why do you hate? He can't answer the question. And actually, when he tries to push himself on the question, it says, no, there's no satisfactory answer for why I hate things. In fact, it's not even a fair question to ask me that. It's like, what? What do you mean? What do you mean? None of this actually means anything. It's wonderfully written, but it's entirely meaningless.
Yes. It's so tiresome. I mean, it reminds me of being like 15, not in the sense that I was like full of hate and like Harold, but in the sense that like when I was 15, I was just smart enough to form like elaborate monstrosities of thought in my mind, but not smart enough to notice when I was full of shit. And so, you know, it's part of adolescence actually, is like you become smart enough to like grapple with abstractions, but you're not experienced enough to sort of step back from yourself and be like, what the fuck are you doing? Just shut up and like take the garbage out. Shut up and do what you're supposed to do, you know?
Yeah, do your fucking chores, man.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful in how fucking annoying it is. I mean, that's the thing I love about this is compared to like the actual representatives of evil we've seen in this thing, it's just like, dude, you're a joke. You're a fucking joke. And it's not that like I'm saying he's not capable of doing bad things, but it's just like I just want to be like, you're a loser. Like you deserve to be made fun of.
Yeah, that's like I don't want to even grant him the term tragedy, but I guess that is the tragedy of it all. Is like Franny has pointed out, like you could just stop this, Harold. Just like stop. You like there's no reason to keep doing this, but he's like locked in, and like the very idea that he should stop to him is like offensive. It's like no, this is all I have. This hate is all I have. And it's like, well, you could have whatever you want. You have the most to gain from this out of anyone.
Yeah. I mean, it takes a very special person to look at a world in which 7 billion people died and you, one of the lone survivors, is somehow a victim like that. And that's kind of exactly what Harold has done here. And he can't let go of it. I love this part here where he says like he could let it go. He could let the hate go. He could let all these things go. But when faced with the knowledge that he was free to accept what was, he had rejected the new opportunity. To seize it would have been to murder himself. The ghost of every humiliation he had ever suffered cried out against it. His murdered dreams and ambitions came back to eldritch life and asked if he could forget them so easily. In the new free zone, he could only be Harold Lauder. Over there, he could be a prince. That's fucking bullshit, man. Like, the thing is, he contradicts himself, right? Like, he says that he can't change, he can't let things go because that would be murdering who he is, essentially. So in essence, he's saying, I am not just Harold Lauder. I am a prince. And I have to go to the only place that sees me for how fucking awesome and amazing I am.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, it's school shooter mentality is what it is. It's like
you're totally right.
Self victimization that turns into self-aggrandizement, and it's just muddy, shitty thinking is what it is, which is interesting because like, and I guess unfortunate, because Harold was somebody who kind of prided himself on his intellect and learnedness. But I do think it's true that almost anybody can sort of get sucked into really toxic ways of thinking.
Yeah. So. I mean, that's the scariest part is Harold is very smart, right? He's a very smart person, and yet he's behaving like an absolute idiot. Like he's just like you said, he's exactly smart enough to know how smart he is, but not smart enough to know when he's being a stupid moron.
Yep.
All right, we move on to chapter 51, and it's time to get really into politics here, Matt. Our final chapter of the week begins with Larry and Leo going to meet Harold, this time successfully. I really love this moment at the beginning of the chapter, like this kind of chapter-defining moment where Leo throws a rock through a car window and Larry tells him to stop. And Leo asks why, and Larry does not have a good reason for that. And I think that's a perfect distillation of what life is in the Boulder Free Zone at this exact moment. Society had rules, and one of the rules was you don't throw rocks at car windows. But those rules are gone, right? This car doesn't belong to anyone. It's nobody's. It's just trash sitting here in the road. There's no reason to preserve it. How do you teach someone right and wrong in a world in which all this former society stuff is just completely irrelevant now?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and here in this particular case, I think that Leo is just sort of in the right in a sense. I mean, I think there is no reason not to smash the window of a useless car that will inevitably just rust into the ground, or at best be rolled away for scrap or something. I think what you do is you return to the basics of the golden rule. Morality needs to be grounded in simple premises like don't harm anybody, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The taboo against breaking windows is basically just a convention. It's an old and an irrelevant convention. The only application would be like, well, does somebody live in that house currently? Yes. Okay, then don't break their windows because that would harm them. And then so you ground it in something really concrete, especially with kids. I find that it helps to have a concrete rule like that.
Sure. I mean, what about just the general lack of safety that glass introduces to, like the broken glass introduces to an environment?
Sure. Yeah. Well, that could be another justification. Is it's like, hey, by doing that, you have made this area dangerous for the next person who might walk by, right? And then that's also grounding it in that golden rule, harm centered morality, which I think is actually pretty intuitive for children, actually.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So from here, we move to the actual meeting with Harold himself. So Larry kind of inadvertently sneaks up on Harold, and the surprise that happens here means that we see the man for a brief moment. Larry sees the man before he puts his mask on, and it kind of terrifies him, right? He sees immediately like, this man's going to kill me with the trowel. He's going to do that. And then he immediately like flips a switch, puts the mask on, and becomes the politician, the huge smile, gregarious guy that he wants everyone to love. And I guess that's the question here I want to ask you, Matt, is we see here that Harold is, putting this mask on. He's, trying to be the smiley person that everyone likes. He's also walking more. He's not eating as much candy, and so his complexion is cleared up. He's losing weight. He seems to be doing all the things that you would expect a person like trying to fit in with society would want to do to be more successful in that society. But why? Why is he doing that? Because it's become very clear to us that he's not interested in this society. He's not interested in fitting in here. He's not interested in being a part of this thing at all. So why even put on the mask? What's the point of any of this?
I guess hating just consumes a lot of calories, and he wants to just really put his energy. I mean, I don't actually have a serious answer. Like, I don't. I think there's this sort of tragic irony here that Harold has actually sort of grown up into someone who no longer has all of the like obvious physical flaws that Harold had before, but instead of like going with it and sort of becoming like, oh, it's slim, likable, handsome Harold, he's just gonna like use this to hurt people more, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have a good answer to your question though.
I have a theory,
Okay.
and my theory is he's trying to prove a point. I think in Harold's mind, he would think I could be the person they all want me to be, and they would still hate me, and I will prove that by becoming that person. And he's kind of proving himself right, because they are still inherently mistrustful of him, and something feels off about him, and he doesn't understand that it's because of the terrible like hatred that he's holding in his heart is coming through his mask, and he doesn't quite realize it. I could see the exact kind of thing. This is getting back to kind of incel justification of like, no woman would ever love me no matter what I look like, so why even try? And to prove it, I'm going to actually try, and I'm going to be unsuccessful, and that will prove that I was right this whole time. That, you know, you list all these things that are things I could do to improve my position in society. I'm going to do them to prove it to you, and it's still not going to work.
Yeah.
And I think he's setting himself up for that.
Right.
And
well,
that just fuels that hatred.
And the thing about that is, it's like, well, yeah, if you continue to hate yourself,
yeah,
and that's fundamentally, I think what it is it's like the root of hating everyone is really hating yourself.
Yeah.
I don't think Harold sees it that way, and in fact, that probably is the the mainspring that King referred to earlier. It's like he can never acknowledge that that's the mainspring. That's why he's never going to figure it out. He can't think of himself as being self-hating, even though that's actually the problem.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest here. There are a bunch of overweight people with acne that are in extremely successful relationships, right?
Uh-huh.
Like this idea that's the one thing separating you and having a successful relationship is verifiably bullshit. Right. So it is much more to do with how you see yourself. People grok to that. People can tell, maybe without putting words to it, but they can tell when a person doesn't like themselves, because they carry themselves differently. They act differently. They, I think it's more complicated than the thing people always say is, oh, well, you have to show confidence. If you don't have confidence in yourself, I think it's more than just confidence, but it's liking yourself. It's liking being around yourself.
I think that is exactly what it is. I've been on a crusade to get people to stop saying like, be confident, because it's like, that's not what you mean, actually. Mm-hmm. Like, what you mean is one of the easiest things that humans can read off of each other is how much, like, does this person hold themselves in high regard? Mm-hmm. And if you don't, it's really obvious. And that's not the same thing as being confident.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's exactly what it is. You have to like yourself at a minimum. Mm-hmm.
So, while Harold goes to get some wine glasses, Larry like immediately finds his diary. I think it's so funny how quickly he finds this thing. He's just like, oh, there's a loose stone here. Oh, look there. Oh, there's a diary here. He of course doesn't read it, because reading someone else's diary would be a psychotic thing to do, and Larry is not psychotic. So, but I mean, it's just kind of it's one of those moments in the book where you're like, oh, we're doing something here, because like you don't just set this up for no reason.
Yes, for sure. I predict that this diary will not be found again until it's too late to do anything about it.
And then Larry will be like, oh yeah, there was a ledger I saw once.
Yeah, let's go figure out why he did all those things now. Yeah.
So the conversation with Harold goes fine, right? I mean, it's a relatively normal conversation, but as Larry walks home from it, he kind of starts freaking out a little bit. Something just doesn't feel right to him, and he starts free associating. He goes from Boulder over to that band shell that night he slept there and felt the presence of the dark man. He goes back to the Lincoln Tunnel and the feeling he felt in there, and then he ends up all the way back to a experience he had with his mother at a zoo, where he smelled a really disgusting smell that he didn't like, and she taught him how to kind of push past and become used to the smell. This is kind of what we talked about a little bit earlier. This idea that you know human beings are pretty adaptable, and we have this ability to just get used to things like bad smells. We can just get used to bad smells. We do it all the time,
Yeah.
and he allows himself to smell Boulder in this moment. He allows himself to kind of just really, really take in the smell of Boulder, and he unsurprisingly realizes that it smells like shit. It smells like death. It smells like decay. Even though there are less corpses here, there are still corpses. And I really love this moment. He was smelling what was behind all the closed doors and drawn shades and pulled blinds. He was smelling the slow corruption that was going on, even in this place which had died almost empty. And so this idea that like, they're building this society, right? They're rebuilding America in a lot of ways, and many of them are just choosing not to smell what's underneath America, choosing not to smell the death and the destruction and the decay and the horribleness. We've just gotten used to it, and so we're not smelling it anymore.
Yeah.
I really love this.
Yeah. And it's because we've decided to, right?
Mm-hmm,
And,
mm-hmm.
and there's also the more kind of immediate metaphor of just like he just talked to Harold,
Yeah,
and then he definitely smelled something off metaphorically with
yeah,
Harold, but then he just kind of decided, nah, I imagined it, right? And
yeah.
but like he knows he didn't, so it's still bugging him subliminally, and I think that's why he begins free associating in the first place. And then it comes up when he talks to Leo, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, it does. Yeah, I mean that's the thing we didn't mention before was that Leo came with him originally, saw Harold's house, and just went like, "Nope, not doing that. I'm going
Mhm.
home. I'm going to go hang out with Nadine." Which, by the way, if you choose creepy Nadine over over someone else, you know where you stand, Harold.
Uh-huh.
That's not good.
Yeah.
But he finds here on the way back as he's doing this that Leo has been sitting here waiting for him. He didn't just go home to Nadine. He sat here. And I mean, Larry was at Harold's for like a long time. Like it wasn't just like a 30-minute trip. He was there for hours. And so Leo was kind of so concerned and so worried about Larry that he sat here waiting for him to come back. And he's kind of trying to play it off as if it wasn't that big of a deal, but obviously it was, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my vibe from this whole bit was that Leo got some strong shine off of Harold, some strong negative magical vibe
Mm-hmm.
that was like this guy is extremely dangerous, bad, evil. And he kind of like fugues out when he's talking to Larry, right? Like he starts saying,
Yeah.
I don't remember what he says exactly, but he's saying stuff where it's like he's like having a vision right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that Larry fully appreciates the importance of it, but we do.
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult. Like, it's really easy for us to sit here and be hard on these characters, but like,
Hmm.
I think it's fully understandable that like, I don't know, like you don't, especially a person like Larry, who Harold was such an important person to him these past few weeks. You don't want to immediately be like, oh, this guy's bad news. Like,
Yeah,
I think most human beings don't want to believe that a person is bad. That would need super duper extra convincing to actually go, oh no, this is just a bad person, and you shouldn't associate it with them anymore. Like I think we're really hesitant to believe that in a lot of people.
yeah. No, I think you're right. Yeah, I mean, we like to believe the best in people, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So from here we move on to Franny and Stu and their wonderful domestic relationship that I just love to death. Franny is attempting to wash some clothes by stepping on them. Stu is laughing at her, and the two eventually escalate this little ribbing to boning. Um, and it's I don't know, like there's a lot in this chapter that we're not really focusing on, but it's a lot of just pure domestic scenes, right? Like there's this domestic partnership scene of love between the two of them, and then like when Stu goes over to talk with Larry, like Lucy is in the kitchen like making them dinner, and so it's so wild how quickly we've gone from this post-apocalyptic like walking along the road and Stu talking about, oh, we need to all be more smart and wise about the world, and then they're just like sitting in a house while the missus is making us dinner while we're discussing plans for the next committee meeting. It's so how quickly it goes from one thing to another.
Yeah, right. I think it is important here to sort of break the inexorable forward movement of the plot and show that some level of normalcy has returned, and that
Yeah.
people are able to just sort of comfortably lay back and enjoy this, doing laundry, right? Something really,
Yeah.
really boringly mundane.
Hmm.
And so, on the one hand, it breaks the momentum of the story in a way that I think people find like deflating, but also it lets us recognize that we have transitioned into a different part of the story.
Yeah. Yeah. A wonderful part of the story. I really like it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So later, we do see that conversation between Stu and Larry as they discuss Harold. Oh, I skipped a bit. Sorry. Um, they're talking about the committee. And this is when we learn that Dick Ellis has declined his spot on the committee. He's too busy. He sees his worth elsewhere. So they need a seventh member. They mention Larry. This is the first time Larry is mentioned, that Ralph kind of put his name in because he met him and really liked him. And I think this makes sense from a story perspective, because like Larry's one of our protagonists and we know him really well, and he should be involved in all the big goings on. But like, they just met this dude, right? It seems very, very quick that we're like, oh yeah, we'll put him in a permanent position of power.
Yeah. Right. It does seem like they could have just been like, yeah, we'll just have 6 then instead of 7.
Right. Like, why 7? I mean, besides the
Yeah. Like
holy number implication of 7,
yeah,
like
absolutely have to have 7 people, right?
uh-huh.
I don't know. I admit that I'm not sure. I guess, in one sense, you want a broad selection of stakeholders. And if there's a lot of people who trust Larry and they don't know anybody else, then it makes a degree of sense.
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't make it's very quick though. It's very quick to put your trust in someone that, I mean, like, I think the weird thing is, like, we've been covering this book for, I think this is episode 9, so we've been covering this book for 2 months, which is more time than any of these people have spent with each other.
That's really funny. We've spent more time with them than they have with themselves.
Yeah. So like, for us, it seems like it's very quick that they're so trusting of a person like Larry, but it's like, well, I think Stu and Ralph met like 3 days ago.
Mhm.
So like, it seems like it's fast, but I think everything that's happening for them is kind of fast relatively. So
Yeah, that's true. That makes sense.
so sorry to move from there. Stu kind of meets with Larry a little bit later to kind of broach the topic with him. I love this idea that he used, like, he hears about how obsessed with Harold he is, and he decides to use his reaction to actually meeting Harold as a kind of a litmus test for whether Larry's trustworthy or not. And Larry immediately passed the test because he's cautiously concerned about Harold in a way he can't quite articulate.
Yeah, right. It's like the perfect thing to say. It's the perfect diplomatic thing to say too, because you don't just want to be like, "Oh, that guy, he weirded me out."
Yeah, he's a fucking creep. Yeah. Yeah, totally. And so he passes the test and he invites him to be part of the council, which Larry immediately says yes to, which is pretty cool, right? I mean, like, again, this is his opportunity to kind of snake away and think things are getting hard, things are getting serious, and I can get out of here without any responsibility and leave it to the other people. And he doesn't do that. He steps up and says, "Yep, I kind of like being in charge. I kind of like helping and guiding. And so, yeah, I'm in."
And he knows that he can do a good job at it, and it's a role of service for him. It's not a role of like, I get to be important.
Yeah. So meanwhile, Franny has had a thought, and as soon as Stu leaves for Larry's, she puts her hypothesis to the test. She digs through her closet and finds her old diary and starts leafing through it. As she's doing it, she's kind of mentally pointing out all the moments that we kind of pointed out of where she's just kind of nasty to Harold. And again, something happens here similar to our other beat that I want to talk to you about, which is she Harold probably deserves all the rude comments. Probably not like the ones about his smell. It's probably mean. Like, I'm sure everyone probably smells. Are people showering regularly? I don't know.
I don't think so.
But I love when Franny says, as she's leafing through these mean comments she made, it's like, why did I say that? To what purpose was I mean? Like, what was the purpose of doing this? I just really love that she frames it that way. But what are we supposed to think about this? Like, I just don't know.
I don't know either. I think this just plays into the same idea before about how, like, you wish you could cut somebody some slack, but it just becomes too much eventually. there's also this really strong urge to vent, which
Sure.
she did a good job not venting, to like Stu when they were out on the road together. So she vented to her diary instead. But it's interesting because like I don't think the book is taking a moral stand here, but it's interesting to consider like there's this Christian prohibition against gossip, which I've always really admired the people who I've met who actually took that really seriously and didn't gossip, because it's like when you meet those people, you realize like, wow, this is a really destructive habit of that I totally have. And so like Franny, this is a bit of a stretch maybe, but it's almost like her diary is serving the form of gossip, where it's like you're speaking ill of somebody for really no reason. Like there's no reason you needed to speak ill of this person, even to the privacy of your own diary. Now, Matt, are you saying that you don't have the right to just write whatever you want in your diary? No, I don't really give a shit about that. But you could argue that like just speaking ill of people is probably just something you should avoid, right?
Yeah. It's purposeless. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the main question I have here is, are we meant to see Franny's rudeness to Harold via her diary as a character flaw, or are we meant to see her inability to allow the rudeness to go to the full extent of, oh, this guy's bad and dangerous and we shouldn't have him around? Is that the character flaw, or are neither of them are the character flaw, and that's not what we're doing with this stuff at all?
I mean, if I were in her position, I don't think I'd be asking myself, to what purpose did I say that? I would be like, did this motherfucker read my diary? like it would be, it wouldn't be, I wouldn't be thinking like, oh, I did something wrong here. I would be like, no, this was a violation. I didn't do anything wrong here, So I don't know if that helps or not, but that's,
I guess, yeah. I mean, it is interesting. The way it kind of frames it is that what we're saying here is not that, oh, Harold violated me in this very specific kind of way, but like, oh my God, look at all this shitty stuff I said about him that he definitely read. That seems to be the immediate focus of her thought here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could view it as a character flaw to like care too much about what an obviously bad person thinks about you, maybe.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like that, like, I don't know. I wonder, like, if Stu's ever going to go like, hey, you need to stop caring about Harold so much. Like he's trying to be like, I think he understands that she has this responsibility that she feels very strongly for Harold, and he's being as patient as possible with it. But like, I think he kind of had Harold all figured out the second he met him, right? Like he kind of knew exactly what kind of guy this was. And I don't think any of his experience with Harold since that moment have changed that. But he also, I think, sees him as pretty harmless overall.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to consider that like Franny's like generosity is her character flaw. I mean, it's to kind of flip something on its head. It's like, well, she's showing generosity and mercy toward this pathetic, vaguely Gollum-like figure, but I don't feel like we're building toward a moment where that's going to be rewarded by the narrative. Sure. I feel like that's just like, no, you should have recognized that this guy was actually a ticking time bomb, and just like, no, don't cut him the slack. Stop cutting him the slack. Yeah. In fact, maybe cutting him the slack was the thing that kind of made him feel like this made sense or whatever. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I will, once again compare it to what we talked about with Nick and Tom and Julie, where he didn't cut her any slack. He got her the fuck out of there right away. And maybe that is indeed the correct move. And he made the 100% correct move. And it was her kind of failure to not call a spade a spade.
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine Roland being like, I don't trust this guy. We're leaving him behind, like, yeah. Kind of the necessary hard choice, right? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know. Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
But of course, the one thing she notices here on one of the pages of the diary is exactly what she feared. She finds a fingerprint in the diary, and it's a fingerprint in chocolate. Matt, this is when I let you know that payday bars do not have chocolate on them.
That's hilarious.
A payday bar is caramel and nougat wrapped in peanuts, and that's it. There's no chocolate.
It's really quite hilarious because, okay, so Scott has put a picture of a payday bar in the script here. And I have obviously never seen a payday because it looks completely unappetizing, actually.
They're not good candy bars.
It's got to be the ugliest candy bar I've ever seen, honestly, just to be frank with you.
I just imagine eating this over like a Snickers or another good candy bar. It's like,
yeah,
what the fuck are you doing?
I'm imagining taking a bite and like 7 peanuts fall off of the thing for every bite you take.
I mean, I've had them before. They're pretty stuck in there. They push them into the nougat and then it hardens.
Okay, fair enough.
So they don't come flaking off very much. But I don't know. It's almost like too much peanut. Like there's just too much peanut going on here.
Sure. Yeah. No, it definitely looks like too much peanut.
But I mean, so what's going on here? There's no chocolate. I looked it up. Chocolate paydays did not become part of the regular payday rotation until 2020. We didn't have chocolate paydays until 2020, probably as some kind of weird tie-in marketing with the miniseries or something. Probably. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's another level of the tower where they had chocolate paydays and nozzle cola. And
I mean, we know that for a fact that it is another level of the tower where the Kansas City team is not the Royals. So yeah, there you go. I mean, the honest truth here, Matt, is Stephen King probably never ate a payday himself. He just picked a candy bar and was like, some sort of chocolate bar. Yeah. And B, it's very possible that while they did not have chocolate paydays constantly and consistently produced until 2020, they probably at various points made like temporarily like it doesn't matter, but
yeah, it does. It's also possible.
The most important thing we've ever talked about.
It's the most important thing. It's possible that Harold just ate some other candy bar other than payday like once. You know, no, you don't think so?
No. I think if anyone ever tells me, and listeners out there, this could be you, if a payday is your favorite candy bar and you would eat it over all other candy bars, I'm gonna assume that you're a bad person.
When we go to Maine, I'm going to bring just a backpack full of paydays and I'm going to eat them everywhere we go. And
not only eat them, but leave the wrapper. I think this is another thing we didn't talk about, that like, yes, the world has ended and it doesn't matter if you throw trash anywhere, but also stop fucking throwing trash everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm totally going to just leave the wrapper on the ground. Absolutely.
You're not going to do that because you're going to eat one payday bar and be like, this is not good. And then you're going to move on with your life.
No, I honestly think I'd feel ill if I ate more than one. Yeah, you're right.
Oh my gosh. We have a lot of like payday stands and listeners that are like furious with us right now.
I'm sorry. We don't really mean it.
I do.
I kind of mean it. Yeah.
All right. So we're not going to talk about the entire first ad hoc committee meeting, Matt, which is what the rest of the chapter is about, because it's a lot, and we've been going on for a ridiculous amount of time already, frankly. But I did want to, at the beginning here, talk to you about kind of the format of this, which is, once again, we kind of move into a semi-epistolary style here, where we're actually just reading. For the most part, we're reading the actual minutes from the first meeting. These minutes were taken by Franny, who was voted the secretary of the group. And so once again, it's a Franny point of view that we're doing epistolary, so it kind of matches her diary stuff from earlier. But I guess, what did you think of the choice to structure it in that kind of way? Once again, is it distinctly different from the diary? Does it add the same benefits as doing the diary did, or is it something different?
Well, I'd say it does feel different. I mean, It is interesting to point out that Franny's chapters are all have this epistolary component. It makes her chapters really stand out and feel different. But this really does feel different entirely from having a diary. I guess it gives you more of a sense of like a script, or like a scene, or like a play or something, where it's, you lose the internality of the characters, and it's this. It's more about what is being said. I think it just makes sense. Another just practical consideration for stuff like this is, like, if you didn't do it this way, then it would be like 5 times longer, because it would be full of like he said, sitting back and folding his arms and looking over at Franny and et cetera, right? And as it is, you're able to sort of trim that out and just have the dialogue carry it.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that, but I think you're right. So they talk about many things during this meeting. The first is kind of this general agreement that Mother Abigail will be consulted on all things related to the Dark Man, but other than that, they will be basically left alone to their own devices to decide the general affairs of the Free Zone. One of those is that they basically decide immediately on separation of church and state. So, like, I guess the solution, Matt, for how they avoid becoming a theocracy is just say, we will never mention God or anything religious during any of our meetings ever, which like is a noble thing to do. But like, I don't know. I think the founding of America as a religiously free country would have been more difficult if, for example, George Washington like was literally being spoken to by God. I think that would have been a little harder.
Yeah, right. And it's right. I mean, it's the reasoning behind that at the time was like, hey, let's not have all of those horribly bloody religious wars that everybody literally fled Europe to get away from. And this is like, well, we're gonna have one of those,
but also we're planning a religious war.
We're gonna do that though, so like that's unavoidable.
All religions are welcome in the Boulder Free Zone, but we actually are literally talking to God, so you might want to consider hopping on the bandwagon here.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So the other thing they decide to do is, what to do about the Dark Man. This is kind of their big decision during this very first meeting, and the vote is that 3 spies will be sent into his territory to just gather information and report back what's going on over there. Sue immediately wants to go herself, but the committee basically decide that no committee member should get to volunteer. They decide they're too valuable to risk. I love Sue's reaction to this. She says, I suppose you're right, or at least being sensible, but I do wonder sometime if those 2 things are always the same, or even usually the same. What you're really saying is that we can't send anyone from the committee because we're all just so fucking inexpendable. So we just I don't know. Stu, lay back on the buckwheat? Yes, thank you. That's what I meant. We lay back on the buckwheat and send somebody over there, maybe to get crucified on the telephone pole, maybe something even worse. So they just basically decide, we, the committee that just formed 30 seconds ago, is too important. We can't risk our lives.
Yeah. No, it's great because it's like wait, like if you really want to volunteer, you could just pick somebody else. Like you don't. Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous actually.
Yeah. So the topic of the question then becomes who to send. Larry goes first, and he says he wants to ask Judge Ferris, the old judge that we met at the beginning of this week's reading. Someone who's super smart and super capable, but also Larry argues that his age makes him maybe able to slip in a little bit easier, that perhaps Randall Flagg would not look at an old man and assume that their side sent an old man to spy on them, that they would assume perhaps something differently. And so that's a distinct advantage that Judge has. They kind of see his point of view and eventually end up agreeing and vote 7-0 that Judge will be one of the people they ask to go on this mission. Any results, any or reactions to his pick?
I mean, just in general, I really don't like the idea of sending spies because like the Dark Man is like psychic as far as we know, as far as I know.
Sure.
And like,
but they don't know that.
I guess they don't. I guess they don't. Although he is sending them magical psychic dreams, so I would worry. I just think the idea of sending a spy from Boulder to Las Vegas, like on foot, it's like this is just not the best way to go about this.
I mean, they traveled all the way to Boulder from like Maine,
right,
to Vegas,
but like
did it.
Just the level of risk and the time it would take, and it's just overall, I think if I was in this position, I just wouldn't even be sending spies. I would just be like, yeah, we're just not gonna. if people come this way from that direction, then we'll ask them what's going on. But I'm not gonna. I just don't think it's a good idea. But apparently, they think it's such a good idea that they're gonna send multiple people.
That's right, because they also send Dana Jurgens, or at least they're going to ask if Dana Jurgens wants to go. This is Sue's recommendation. Dana, just in case you forgot, Matt, is one of the women that Sue was imprisoned and abused with. So it's a woman she knows very, very well. So she feels that she's totally up to the task.
Uh-huh.
And then our third and final nominee of the night is from Nick, and he says that they want to send none other than Tom Cullen. The group is shocked and dismayed at this fact. Nick's argument here is that Tom would absolutely do it because he loves Mother Abigail and will do anything that they ask him to do, basically. That the man in black would never expect a mentally disabled person to be a spy, because why would you do that? He would never expect it. And also because he is disabled, they would be able to sufficiently drill his cover story into his head in a way that he would probably never reveal the truth if he was captured and tortured. And also they could, implant some stuff in him via hypnotism. This kind of ties back to that moment of Tom's thinking when we first met him, that it's this kind of self hypnotism they reason, and so they could do it to him as well. So that's his argument, that Tom Cullen is gonna go to probably die. Franny is livid about this, Matt. She says here, I'm going to have my say. I won't wash my hands of the committee or even walk off in a huff if I'm voted down, but I'm going to have my say. Do you really want to take that sweet foggy boy and turn him into a human U-2 plane? Don't any of you understand that's the same as starting the old shit over again? Can't you see that? What do we do if they kill him, Nick? What do we do if they kill all of them? Breed up some new bugs? An improved version of Captain Trips? So that's Franny's reaction to this plan. Matt, I understand you have a specific reaction to this part of the plan.
Yeah, I just want to go on record as saying that sending Tom Cullen is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And I can, okay, so by introducing the idea of the hypnosis or whatever, on its face, you're like, that's ridiculous. But in context of the fact that we're reading a fiction book with magic in it, I'm capable of being like, all right, so the hypnotism thing is just a conceit that I'm probably just expected to accept as real. But even so, dumbest idea I've ever heard.
Why?
It's too complicated. I think any plan that involves this many weird, unlikely things going in their favor, when really you can imagine 100 different ways this could go wrong, it's no, it just can't work. It's such an obviously bad idea that I feel like it's going to go off swimmingly, and Tom is going to be the MVP of the whole operation, because it's just such a stupid sounding idea on its face.
Yeah, I mean, you asked me if I thought this was a stupid idea, and I couldn't answer you legitimately because I know how this all works out. So any opinion I have on the quality of this particular idea is influenced by what I know of the ending, right? So I can't honestly and earnestly answer that question for you. I am thoroughly enjoying your reaction to it, though.
Well, here, I don't feel like I'm just having a weird reaction, right? Because literally everybody in the meeting in the book is like, what? Nick, what?
Yeah.
And that's basically, and King knows that you, the reader, are going to react that way. And so that's why he kind of puts that in the mouth of the characters, I think.
Sure. Yeah. But it passes. It passes eventually 7-0. Originally, both Sue and Franny voted down, but they decided that if they're doing it anyway, they better come off as a unified front. And so they changed their votes to yes. And Tom Cullen will be number 3. And the thing is, he's going to do it, right? Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the biggest problem that I could potentially have with it is not whether it's a good plan or not, but that does he have the capability of truly saying yes to this? Well, to the level of does he fully understand when they pose this question to him? Will he be able to understand enough to consent to doing this in a way that makes me feel comfortable,
Not just the risk of death, but like the guarantee of severe hardship.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is going to be a miserable mission, and he's going to say yes because he's loyal. But like that's a hell of a thing. Yeah.
If Nick and Mother Abigail ask him to do something, he'll do it. Like he's just gonna 100% he'll do it. So yeah. Like I that's the part that makes me go like, and I think the king appropriately puts that in the book too. Like, does he have the capability of saying yes? Does he have the capability of understanding what you're actually asking him to do here? And if the answer to that is no, isn't it morally irresponsible for you to even pose the question to someone? If you know when you ask a question is your answer will be yes no matter what, even if they don't even understand what you're asking, should you even ask the question at that point?
Mm-hmm. And another sort of horrible possible outcome that I thought of was like you drill him so well on the story of like, the people in Boulder were awful and mean to me and they kicked me out or whatever. And then he just comes to actually believe that. And the post-hypnotic stuff doesn't really work. And now he just actually is, you have successfully literally made him bad. Good job, everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely a lot of risk. And the reward is, we don't really know, minimal, I guess. Right.
Like, right. That's the thing is from the position that we're in the story right now, it's like, what could he possibly tell them? And that would be so valuable as to be worth the sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe eventually there will be some answer to that question. But right now it's not clear to me.
Sure. All right. Well, they vote to send Tom and the committee meeting breaks up for the night. And then we end the chapter on Franny and Stu in bed, kind of talking about it. And I love what Stu says here. It's a dirty business sending out spies. You were right, Franny. Only trouble is Nick was right too. In a case like that, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Franny says, vote your conscience, then get the best night's sleep you can, I guess. And so that's what they do. And that's what we're going to do, Matt, because it's very late. It's very late tonight. We went so incredibly long. I knew we were going to do it. And we said not to do it. And then we did it anyway.
It's the longest section of reading of the whole book, right? Yeah.
Yeah. This was the most pages. This was an accident, right? I didn't do this on purpose, but
no.
It's just the way it works. So that is our chapters for the week. Next week we will pick up again with chapters 52 and 53. See, only 2 chapters this week, Matt. So it'll be better, even though it's, I think, an equal number of pages. No, it's like 20 pages less. We'll be fine.
Perfect.
All right, folks, this is the part of the show where you would normally read all your wonderful discussion question answers, but if you look at the timestamp on this episode, you will see that we have somehow been going for 2 hours and 30 minutes already. In fact, you don't know this, but in the time between those 2 sentences I just said, a whole day went by.
It's true.
Because we went so late last night that it was like 12:30 at night before we finished, and we were like, let's just go to bed and we'll do the rest tomorrow.
Yeah.
And now we've, after sleeping on it, come to the realization that we can't make this episode any longer, Matt. Yeah. We have to just wrap it up.
Right. It's a slippery slope. You get to the point where you're just basically spending 2 hours a night every night just podcasting, and we're almost there, but we've kept ourselves just shy of that precipice.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we will not be reading all of your answers to the discussion question this week. They were all great, by the way. I read them all as I normally do, and I thoroughly enjoyed all your different action sequences and set pieces. And by the way, there was another Watership Down answer in there, Matt, which is just like, the world is telling us we need to read Watership Down.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised at how few I was actually familiar with. I mean, yeah, some for sure. Like Do My As Wells and The Wheel of Time, or certain bits of Saving Private Ryan. But a lot of them I've never heard of that. So anyway, thanks for your contributions. Yeah,
thanks so much. And sorry again, if there's one part of the show we must cut, I think everyone will agree that this is probably the best part. I told this to my wife, by the way, and she was like, why don't you just talk less? Like,
you know what, folks?
Good point.
That was us trying to talk less, just so you know.
We went into this episode, saying we're not gonna go on as many tangents. And this is the result. So I mean, now we're going on a tangent about tangent. So okay, so basically no discussion question reading this week, but we will still have one next week, and hopefully we get to read those answers. Matt, what discussion question are we doing for our listeners next week?
Next week, the question is, what is your favorite character description in fiction?
Yeah, so in honor of the beautiful description of Ralph and several other characters throughout this week's reading, where we just want to know, like, what is like the best described character you've seen in literature, right?
Yeah, I think leaning toward sort of the way Stephen King does things, where he has this way of just with like a page of text making you feel like, oh, I know that guy. Of course, different authors do things different ways. So, always welcome to think outside the box. But yeah, I look forward to this because this is one of those writing skills that I see as being super important and not something I'm particularly good at. So I want to kind of study it and understand it better.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. So
cool.
Hopefully we'll get some great answers and hopefully have time to read them on the show next week.
All right.
But that is going to do it for us this week. As we said, next week we will continue with The Stand, chapters 52 and 53, only 2 chapters. So we're going to do great on time. It's going to be perfect. You'll see. You'll all see.
Okay. Yep. And you can reach us at email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, over on Twitter at kingslingerspod, and on the subreddit at r/doofmedia. We almost always do get to those discussion questions, but this was the longest stretch of reading in the entire book, so you'll just have to forgive us.
It's all my fault. It's 2 years ago Scott's fault when he was cutting the book into sections for us.
Yeah, it is.
If you're not already subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so you'll never miss an episode. And you're missing the discussion question part already. Hopefully you won't miss the episode. You can find us basically everywhere that podcasts are to be found. We're all over the place. Just put us in Google and you'll find it.
It really does work. If you like Kingslingers and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new patrons Dana B, Jake B, and Shane L. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff we have over on the Patreon, including just this week we released our other levels of the tower, looking at the film Silver Bullet, as we discussed.
Yeah. And of course, if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing this podcast with all your Stephen King loving friends, family, and free zone neighbors, right?
Yeah.
This week's Spotlight review comes from Bowfinger1542, who gives us 5 whole stars and says, my favorite podcast. This is not the only Stephen King podcast that I listen to, but it is my favorite. And my favorite overall. Thursday mornings, I have a routine of listening to the podcast, then listening to next week's chapters on Audible. I love these guys. The things that separates Kingslingers from other podcasts is they go into delicious detail for the books that they cover. Where some podcasts have 2 or 3 episodes on the stand, Kingslingers does maybe 15. I really enjoy their depth. Yeah, not just 15, Bowfinger, but 15 2.5 hour long episodes. So you could maybe argue almost too much detail, but I won't be the one doing that.
Yeah, what a timely review. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Bowfinger. And thank you to everyone who has taken the time to send in those ratings and reviews. Please keep them coming. Please, please, please. We really do love them, and they really do help. All right, folks, that is going to do it for us. At last, we are done, and we appreciate you guys making it all the way to the end of this ridiculously long episode. We'll see you back here next week for another one. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.